Without further ado, it is my pleasure right now to welcome the Charles Rudd Distinguished Public Lecture Organizing Chairman, Dr. Bo Woei, to deliver his welcome address. Please help me welcome Dr. Bo.
Her Excellency Ms Iwona Piórko, European Ambassador to Singapore, Professor Gong, President, World Federation of Engineering Organization, distinguished speakers and panelists, sponsors, Gold, ST Engineering, Silver, CapitaLand, JTC, Mitsubishi Electric, PSA and SIT, Bronze, NUS and PSB Economy, Presidents and members of ASEAN Federation of Engineering Organizations and World Federation of Engineering Organization, guests and partners of IES, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of President of IES, Dr. Richard Kwok, and President of WeFeel, Professor Gong, I welcome all our guests, including more than 3,000 attendees joining us via live stream from both Singapore and overseas to the Charles Rudd Distinguished Public Lectures 2022. Thank you for taking time with us. IES Public Lectures started in 1986 and later renamed as Charles Rudd Distinguished Public Lectures in 2007, in memory of the late engineer Charles Rudd, who had bequeathed 1.2 million to IES. With the support of various sponsors and members, the donation was later commissioned for the construction of the IES Green Building at Bukit Tinggi, where we are currently located. The building has achieved the BCA Green Mark Platinum Award, and it represents a new icon of engineering excellence that incorporates the latest sustainable technologies. Today's lectures will also be commemorating the World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development on 4th of March, an international day declared by UNESCO to celebrate engineers and engineering achievement in our modern world. The day also seeks to enhance public understanding on how engineering and technology are central to modern life and sustainable development. IES will also be participating in the WED 24-hour live event hosted by WeFeel. This is the first ever 24-hour live broadcast around the world of a global UNESCO Day. We are looking forward to it. This year, the themes of the lectures is digital and circular economy, focusing on 5 key areas: climate change, sustainability, carbon neutral economy, resilience, and society 5.0. We are privileged to have Her Excellency Ms Iwona Piórko as our distinguished speaker. So she will touch on increased efforts by the EU to tackle climate change by recognizing the potential of the digital revolution in accelerating the paradigm shift in line with the European Green Deal. Ms. Sheila Remes from Woei will then show us what the sustainable flight of the future will be like. Most of us would probably have forgotten what the flight experience is like since we have not been able to travel for the past 2 years due to the pandemic. But I would love to be on the flight, which is faster, more comfortable, does not pollute our environment, and obviously cheaper. I do reckon this will be a challenge for the airline industry. I hope Ms. Remes will show us a way. We are also honored to have with us today Dr. Darian, McBain, Chief Sustainability Officer of MAS. Dr. McBain is an expert in supply chain analysis and has been named a United Nations SDG pioneer for spearheading environmental initiative. Dr. McBain will help us understand how green revolution and its role in transforming Singapore to a circular economy. Our final speaker will be Professor Cheong Koon, Chairman of Center for Livable Cities of the Ministry of National Development. Prof. Cheong is a familiar figure to many of us. We know her as a power speaker and the ex-chief of HDB, who has transformed our townships that we are extremely proud of. She has also been a very strong advocate for environment and sustainability issues for a very long time. Later on, we will hear from her on how infrastructure investment and development can help countries meet the United Nations SDGs, adapt to climate change, and at the same time, accelerate the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to introduce you to one of our distinguished panelists who will be joining us virtually later, Ms. Susanna Kass. She's a Power 100 and Climate 50 member, an Energy Fellow from Stanford University, and one of the topmost influential climate change thought leaders. Our next panelist is Mr. Jonathan Hua, Senior Vice President of ST Engineering, who leads the group effort in sustainability across all its business units around the world. With his vast experience and working with various industries and companies on business development, research collaboration, and technology development, Mr. Hua will be able to offer invaluable perspective in this topic during the panel discussion. Although we are extremely excited that we can gather many influential women speakers and panelists here today, I want to assure you that gender diversity has not been forgotten. Besides Jonathan, we also have Professor Siram with us this morning. Prof. Siram is the advisor for the Organizing Committee and will be the moderator of the panel discussion later. From championing topics such as ways to live to 100 years old to the circular economy, Prof. Siram has been named as one of the world's most influential scientific minds by Thomson Reuters. Recently, he was also ranked in the top 0.4% of the best scientists in the world. We are honored to be working with Prof. Siram on many IES projects. With this, I will end my address with a wish that today's lecture will inspire us to continue to evolve and innovate to harmonize the man and land in this earth. I wish all of you an enjoyable and informative time with us. Thank you.
And right now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a live feed from the president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Professor Gong.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, distinguished speakers, and panelists, at first, as the president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, WFEO, I extend my warm congratulations to the opening of this Charlie Strutt Distinguished Public Lectures 2022, and also to IES, which is a proactive member of WFEO and has hosted the General Assembly of WFEO in 2013. I would also like to mention that Engineer Sun Chuan Tan, former president of IES, is the treasurer and executive board member of WFEO now. WFEO founded under the auspice of UNESCO in 1968, consists of national engineering organizations from over 100 countries and represents tens of millions global engineers. With its mission being promoting the development of engineering for sustainable development. WFEO has not only actively participated the annual United Nations Science, Technology, Innovation Forum and the High-Level Political Forum for Sustainable Development, but also aligns all our activities with SDGs. For example, in the recent United Nations COP26 conference, we had organized a series of events, including for young engineers and for women engineers on climate change. WFEO has also been committed to build digital ethics and promoting responsible conduct of artificial intelligence and big data in engineering practice by providing suggestions and reviews to the UNESCO's recommendations of the ethics of artificial intelligence. We also worked with IEA in reviewing and updating the benchmark standards of engineering education, graduate attributes, and professional competencies framework to conform to the SDGs and to the fourth industrial revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to increase public awareness of engineers and engineering's crucial role and to mobilize global engineers for sustainable development, WFEO initiated the proposal to establish the World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development, which was approved and proclaimed by UNESCO in 2019 and has been celebrated worldwide on the 4th of March since 2020. Last year, on the World Engineering Day, March 4th, UNESCO launched its second milestone engineering report titled as Engineering for Sustainable Development, Delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals, to which WFEO has made significant contributions. The theme of this year's World Engineering Day is Build Back Wiser, Engineering the Future. From my perspective, since the supreme wisdom of the humankind is the sciences, Build Back Wiser refers to better leveraging science, technology, and engineering to accomplish the SDGs. This year's celebration intends to incorporate two main activities, including a 24-hour live broadcast presenting worldwide celebrations supported by UNESCO. And among them, we have 8 hubs. Among them, one is in Singapore. And another main activity is Global Hackathon for young engineers, for young engineering students to seek innovative engineering solutions for achieving the SDGs. This year's Charles Rudd lectures focused on circular and digital economy, which is closely related to sustainable development, so that we are very pleased to support IES to organize this renowned lecture. Personally, I believe circular economy would be the utmost significant solution to the pressing challenges of the climate emergencies and environmental degradation. Digital technologies, especially big data, AI, and Internet of Things, as well as blockchain, could function as enablers and enhancers for circular economy. For that, all of us have witnessed how digital engineering innovations have energized the society by providing solutions in medical diagnosis, case tracing, and supporting online working and learning, helping people to weather the most difficult time during the pandemic. WFEO will continue to work with the Institution of Engineers Singapore and all our member organizations and partners in employing the wisdom of the engineering community in our pursuit of realizing the SDGs of 2030. With the heartiest wishes to the success of the IES Charles Rudd Distinguished Public Lectures 2022, I conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Gong. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite up on stage our guest of honor this morning, Her Excellency Ms Iwona Piórko, and European Union Ambassador to Singapore. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
Colleagues from the Institution of Engineers Singapore and the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, just had to welcome It is really a great honor to address such a distinguished audience, physically here in Singapore and virtually. I'm really humbled to have been chosen by you to address you today. I'm really glad that you have invited me to address a topic that is really of great importance to the European Union, namely how to make sure that digitalization is an enabler for circular economy. The digitalization of our society and the fight against climate change are really at the core of the European Union priorities. I think it's widely known, and that is so at home in the European Union and abroad. Since my arrival in Singapore September last year, I must say these two themes are ever present in any exchange, be it with the government, with business, private organizations, civil society. And I believe it is precisely imperative to address them jointly together with you, also jointly as subjects, because they are very interconnected, as today's events show. So the European Union has adopted key strategies to address precisely these linkages between digital and green policies. You probably know of our European Green Deal, which basically is our new growth agenda, and it puts a clear focus on use of digital technologies for accelerating green transition. Digital technologies are key to achieve our ambition to cut emissions by at least 55% by 2030 relative to 1990 levels. The digital compass, as we call it, spells out our vision for digital transformation, and it stresses the importance of working towards a green digital future by investing in research and infrastructure. This objective was reinforced very, very recently, at the end of January, when we adopted the Declaration on Digital Principles and Values that we hope many in the world will share. Digital technologies and the way we use them are unfortunately creating an ever-growing ecological impact. The ICT sector's footprint is about 3% of total emissions. This cannot be left unchecked, and you as engineers know it much better than myself. But these same technologies have the potential, big potential, to accelerate green transition. The technologies are mostly neutral in themselves. It's upon us, it's our interest in developing policies that use them positively. Circular economy can definitely make digitalization more closely aligned with environmental objectives. And it is my pleasure to announce that later this year, the EU will adopt new initiatives as part of our Circular Economy Action Plan, which you might be familiar with, where we will focus, in simple terms, on two things: using the power of digital to achieve our green goals, but also greening the ICT sector itself. It will notably include a sustainable product initiative to encourage change in the way we produce and consume, and we hope it will really become a trendsetter. A key component of it will be creation of digital product passport to transfer data useful for optimizing products use and management. Through this digital product passport, vital information can be shared to improve transparency on the life cycle of products and on their material composition. This offers a unique possibility to digitalize our economies, facilitating information exchange between different sectors, countries, citizens, researchers. The Sustainable Product Initiative will help reducing the impact of ICT sector on the environment at the same time. Electronic equipment continues to be one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy, but at the same time, electronic sector is among the biggest waste streams in the EU and globally, and plus with the current annual growth rates of 2%. So although it is important to increase recycling rates of viable critical materials, it is even more important to simply make electronic devices last longer. We can all do that professionally and personally, I'd say. With this new circular economy package, therefore, we will really promote actions to improve product durability in all aspects: durability, reusability, upgradability, and reparability. Needless to say that our efforts to support the green and digital transition go far beyond the European Union. We are responsible for, I think, around 10% of emissions. So we need to work with everybody else around. And we especially work with like-minded countries from all over the world in bilateral and multilateral settings. September last year, we issued a comprehensive strategy for cooperation in Indo-Pacific, where ASEAN and Singapore are really at the center. And among the key areas for strengthened cooperation, the strategy includes green transition, digital governance, and partnerships. We are engaging with all countries in the region, with ASEAN countries at the center of it, to promote ambitious targets to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Because we simply want to learn from each other and through these shared lessons implement and develop policies that support green transition. The strategy also talks about digital partnerships with like-minded countries. We enumerate 3 to start with, and among them Singapore. I'm really very happy to have taken that work forward, and we are in deep discussions already bilaterally on this partnership. EU-Singapore Digital Partnership will create greater opportunities also for cooperation rooted in shared principles and values, such as the shift from linear economic growth to circular one, the subject of our discussion event today. It also encourages cooperation in research and innovation to support green and digital transition. This in line with geopolitical approach of our research framework program, Horizon Europe. You probably have heard it's the largest research fund in the world, actually, with a budget of 95.5 billion euro for years 21-27. I'm really happy that it opens the possibility of association to any country in the world that has an excellent R&I capacity and fulfills a set of criteria related to democracy, open market economy. Singapore is very much on this list, and we are very involved with the government in discussing this possibility. We hope this opportunity will become reality that we will all be able jointly to tap into. And to complement these actions, we recently also adopted Global Gateway. You might have heard about this, our new connectivity strategy that aims to boost smart, clean and secure links in digital, energy, transport sectors, strengthen health, education, research systems across the world. And we hope it will mobilize up to 300 billion in public and private funds until 2027 to address most pressing challenges, from climate change to improving digital infrastructure. And last but not least, very much on the subject of our discussion today, last year, European Union launched Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. This initiative brings together governments and organizations to advocate change in international fora like UN, G7, G20 on circular economy transition, resource efficiency, and sustainable consumption and productions, including in ICT sector. And I truly hope to see more ASEAN countries in it, including Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, all these policies, and I've mentioned many initiatives, they are all there to support digital and circular economy, but this will only work if public, private sectors, research institutes, universities, colleagues like you, civil society work together. It's obvious that only by exchanging ideas, including from bright engineers all across the world and among different generations and cultures, we can turn the challenges into opportunities of our time. So on this day, it gives me really great pleasure to send you best wishes to all the women, and I'm happy so many speaker women today here, but also all the men, obviously, behind these words, that spend their professional life creating a digital and green future for all of us. I have to say that includes my own brother, who is an engineer. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Please remain on stage as we would like to present a token of appreciation to you. All right, and to do the honors, we'd like to invite up on stage IES President, Dr. Richard Kwok. Dr. Bo as well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for being here this morning. Please give Her Excellency a big round of applause. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the Vice President, Environmental and Sustainability, the Boeing Company, Ms. Sheila Remes.
Good morning, and it's a privilege to be able to be here today alongside so many talented and distinguished leaders, as well as welcoming all of you to this in the room and virtually online. So it's really exciting to be able to be here in person and talk about circularity and sustainability. Boeing's committed to protecting, connecting, and exploring our world and beyond, safely and sustainably. I'll get sure. Throughout our long history of innovation, we've looked for ways to improve sustainability. It's a natural act for our industry. Innovations leading to sustainability help lower costs through lower fuel burn, create safer environments for people working in and around aircraft, reduce flight times with tools that make using the airspace more efficient, and yet climate change is a reality that will require aerospace innovation to continue and even accelerate. This is where you come in. Your bold ideas are needed to transform the aviation ecosystem and work towards a decarbonized future. Today, I'd like to share with you Boeing's vision for a carbon-free future of flight. Everything for zero. The reason why I would say everything is because it will take everything and everyone. But it is possible to achieve that carbon-free flight by 2050. This future will enable people to travel without trade-offs. It enables aviation to continue to connect people to cultures, commerce, and experiences that make us all better. There's no single solution to this very complex problem. These transformations will involve changes on the ground, in the air, including the interconnected energy system that we all enjoy today. Reaching zero, an aspiration for a carbon-free flight by 2050, requires us to think beyond our industry, beyond our boundaries, to solve problems in an interdisciplinary way. As we look forward to this future world, we need to understand how we will be living and working in 2050. Over the last 2 years, I think we can safely say that this disruption has caused us to experience new ways of living and working. And what is exciting about that is that it proved that we can do this and that the human ingenuity will find new ways to seemingly impossible problems that we need to solve. In developing these future scenarios, we evaluated what demographic and societal forces will impact our world in 2050 and assessed how those will shape a decarbonized aerospace sector. There are several ideas and areas that will be affected in this future, and we know that the solution will not be addressed through just one technology or one aircraft type. Some of the areas that will be affected is where people will live and work, will shape networks for airlines. Land use requirements will shape airports' locations and growth. New aircraft to support the various new energy sources will be needed. New technology in digital design, augmented reality can affect how our cities and our products will evolve to be more sustainable. Changes on the ground and intermodal needs for transportation in and around the cities will shape the integration of transportation hubs. As we delve into these scenarios, I will share with you what we're doing today on this journey. What are the near-term rolling innovations that are at work? We can't slow down on implementing improvements available today, and we can't stop and wait for that perfect future, and therein lies the challenge. We need to transition while continuing to move forward. From an aerospace standpoint, we're really only about 1.5 to 2 innovation cycles away from 2050, so it's really upon us to make changes. Achieving our industry's commitment to achieve a net zero carbon emissions requires a strategy that really focuses on 4 different areas: fleet renewals, network operational efficiency, a transition to renewable energy, as well as advanced technology. This will include creating all new aircraft, partnering to develop infrastructure and systems, all while continuing to deliver near-term innovations today. So let us look at those scenarios that we've laid out for 2050 and outline why they matter and what we'll need to do to address them, along with what we're doing right now. First and foremost, I think what you'll notice is that the future of flying doesn't look completely unrecognizable. A lot of what we recognize about aviation today will be the same in 2050. How the aircraft are powered will be very different though, with sustainable aviation fuels enabling a new era of long-haul flying. These aircraft forms look very familiar, which again shouldn't be surprising. With trillions of dollars of investment and long cycles to transition fleets, the airplanes will need to continue to operate. However, they need to do so sustainably. And that's where sustainable aviation fuels will come in. In terms of fleet transition times, a good example is our single-aisle fleets. It's the largest fleet in the world, and yet after 5 to 6 years of both OEMs building high rates and delivering high rates of the latest generation of airplanes, only about 10% of the newest aircraft are flying. It takes time. Sustainable aviation fuels will enable aviation to have a drop-in solution which has lower life cycle emissions, enabling existing fleets to decrease emissions without replacing fleets or infrastructures. On the ground, we're able to take advantage of the ongoing electric vehicle and automobile transition for ground support equipment and continue to scale the production of sustainable fuels from various waste sources, such as agriculture, municipal solid waste, oils and fats, and waste gases like methane. When we think about 2050, we need to challenge ourselves to address the entire ecosystem. This future will help decarbonize international travel and trade. There are a number of efforts that we've been working on that put us on the glide slope to that 2050 future. Our Eco Demonstrator is celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year. This is a program that's taken over 200 promising technologies from the lab and tested them in the air to solve real-world challenges for airlines, passengers, and the environment. A different airplane has been used every year as a flying test bed to evaluate projects that improve the entire aviation ecosystem. These projects range from technologies that enhance safety and reduce fuel use, emissions, and noise, to cabin amenities that make flying more enjoyable for passengers, just as what was requested at this offset, to features that increase airline reliability and the efficiency of their fleets and crews. In 2018, the Eco Demonstrator Flight Test Program also made the first world's commercial airplane flight using 100% sustainable aviation fuels. And this was done with the 777 freighter alongside a partner with FedEx Express. Last fall, we partnered with the NASA Langley Research Center to test the emissions of SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, on the 2021 Eco Demonstrator. These are just a few of the ways that Boeing partners with others in the industry to fulfill the program's motto of innovate, collaborate, and accelerate. And with that in mind, a little over a year ago, Boeing committed to certify and deliver new commercial aircraft that will be able to fly on 100% sustainable aviation fuels by 2030, an achievement that we believe will be essential to meeting industry-wide carbon reduction goals for 2050, given the fact that airplanes stay in operations for over 20 years. In July 2021, Boeing, Sky Energy, and Sky Energy Americas announced a partnership focused on scaling the availability and use of sustainable aviation fuels globally, while we're building awareness and engaging stakeholders throughout the value chain, including airlines, governments, and environmental organizations. Boeing will also invest in Sky Energy's America's SAF production project. This investment includes the advanced purchase of sustainable fuels from that facility for use to offset and improve our company operations for flight tests and other operations. Now, moving to the second scenario, we're looking at the future of cities. And I must say, this is the picture that reminds me of Singapore. There are projections that by 2050, 70% of us will live in large cities. And so a future city is an important lens to look at the future of flight. We anticipate that there will be advanced air mobility with eVTOLs, bringing the airport closer to where people live and work. This unlocks a whole new set of destinations, challenging us to look at intercity and intracity transport, linking them together to complete a complementary network. The future city is transformed by huge energy grids, clean energy grids. The infrastructure is really an important part of this. This will usher in the electrification of transport, including aircraft. As we weigh probable and possible futures, we see governments ensuring that all of these futures are incentivized and prioritized. Here you see an intermodal transit hub that reflects a city of the future. High-speed rail, EV cars, as well as pedestrian and biking pathways that will create sustainable mobility for a city. And believe it or not, these are designs that, for this freeway lid, that cities are actually out evaluating. While it might sound like a fantastical future, we're already working towards it. WISC, SkyGrid are two partnerships that we are working with to help define those technologies. In January 2022 of this year, we announced a $450 million commitment to WISC Aero, a leading advanced air mobility company and developer of the first all-electric, self-flying air taxi in the United States. With a robust configuration informed by 5 generations and 1,500 flight test hours, this investment will further advance the development of WISC's 6th generation eVTOL aircraft, a first-ever candidate for certification of autonomous, all-electric, passenger-carrying airplanes in the United States. The company is entering into an intensive growth phase over the next several years. Within 5 years following the certification of its 6th generation aircraft, WISC intends to operate one of the industry's largest fleets of eVTOL aircraft. As the future enables more air vehicles entering the sky, the aviation industry will also need to adopt tools that ensure a safe and efficient travel. This is why Boeing and Spark Cognition formed SkyGrid as a joint venture in 2018. Using blockchain technology, AI-enabled dynamic traffic routing, data analytics, and cybersecurity features, SkyGrid's platform will go beyond unmanned aircraft systems to include air traffic management. The platform will enable SkyGrid customers to safely perform a broad range of missions and services using the unmanned aircraft systems, including package delivery, industrial inspections, as well as emergency assistance. In this third scenario, we're thinking in bigger and bolder ways of what that future might be. By 2050, the global population will grow by 30%, and we expect over 10 billion passengers to take flights annually, which means doubling the number of passengers traveling today. How might we do that and not impact our shared world? This will take some bold ideas and creative solutions, which makes me excited to be talking to a group of engineers. For instance, what constitutes an airport? When you think of developing areas or seasonal markets, could there be bolder ways forward? We may have new aircraft forms coexisting with new energy sources at these new airports. We may also unlock new destinations by thinking about changing the assumption of rigid airports, but considering agile airports. Could this thinking support and align defense needs as well, creating speed and energy independence for our militaries? We can consider using new technologies like additive or augmented reality to help create these new airports. reducing large airport congestion and shifting how people move and travel. The new aircraft and new kinds of airports have the potential to expand air connectivity around the world. This offers the ability to create more cultural and economic opportunities that air connectivity delivers, bringing more air travel and more people together sustainably. We've been making investments in additive, digital, and have spent the last 15 years testing various forms of hydrogen propulsion in liquid, gaseous, and fuel cell developments, as well as cryogenic storage to ensure the safe implementation of new propulsion systems. We'll need green hydrogen for any version of the future. Hydrogen is a required ingredient in all sustainable aviation fuel pathways, not just power to liquid. The green hydrogen economy supports the scaling of SAF. It reduces the life cycle total emissions dramatically. And now I'd like to share with you a few of the projects that we've been working on over the last 15 years. At the end of last year, this new 4.3 meter diameter composite cryogenic fuel tank was designed and manufactured by Boeing, and it passed a critical series of tests at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center at the end of 2021. The successful test campaign proves that this new technology is mature, safe, and ready for use in aerospace vehicles. The test was funded by DARPA and Boeing. Engineers from Boeing and NASA filled the vessel with cryogenic fluid in multiple test cycles, pressurizing the tank to expected operational loads and beyond. The tank that you see here has the energy equivalency of a regional jet-size aircraft, 16,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen, which is equivalent to about 3,700 gallons of Jet A fuel. And that's just to give you a sense of the volumetric challenges that we'll need to work through for future aircraft to utilize liquid hydrogen. Another project that we continue to work on is Scan Eagle. We've innovated with hydrogen and fuel cell applications on board, and we've developed insights through these 5 flight test demonstration programs with both crewed and uncrewed aircraft using hydrogen fuel cells and combustion engines. Scan Eagle is one of those programs, testing liquid hydrogen fuel cells as a mean of alternative propulsion. The Boeing subsidiary In Situ completed the first flight of this unmanned aerial vehicle powered by an all-electric, hydrogen-fueled proton exchange membrane fuel cell last year. And hopefully all of the engineers online and in the virtual audience appreciate all of that. The 30-minute flight confirmed that the initial performance characteristics that will help the program prepare for flight tests using liquid hydrogen storage tank on the aircraft. The 3D printed liquid hydrogen tank is an industry first, and In Situ will fly it in 2022. While the best case scenario with this tank is 3 hours endurance for the Scan Eagle 3, In Situ believes that it can achieve 8 hours endurance with the future of this 3D printed tank on the Scan Eagle 3. Now this last slide is the Phantom Eye, which was another program that we had done flight test program that we had done back in 2012. It was a liquid hydrogen fueled, high altitude, long endurance unmanned aircraft system. The demonstrator aircraft proved capability of maintaining its altitude for up to 4 days, carrying a 450-pound load. A full-size Phantom Eye variant was designed to stay aloft for up to 10 days and carry a payload of up to 2,000 pounds. These are just demonstrations of the entire learning that we need to do as an industry and across industry sectors to be able to have a future of decarbonized flight. I hope that you're as excited about this future of flight so that we can get to that decarbonized future, but we have to start now. We have to be bold. We have to collaborate across companies, countries, universities, and industries. As I started, it will take everything and everyone to get to zero, and we're looking forward to you being a part of this future. Thank you.
Please help me welcome the Chief Sustainability Officer, Monetary Authority of Singapore, Dr. Darian McBain.
Good morning, everyone, and what an honour it is to be here today. Your Excellency, President, Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's so inspiring to be here to celebrate World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development. It's particularly an honour to join with the Institution of Engineers Singapore and the World Federation of Engineering Organisations as we consider our key themes today around sustainability. After that inspiring presentation from Sheila, I think we're all looking forward to what this future is going to hold. The themes of sustainability are now so vital to the engineering community and broader society as a whole that's both heartening and disheartening to me. Heartening that the world is now listening to the critical urgency of these issues. Disheartening in that we saw this crisis coming, but perhaps we didn't act fast enough and in a precautionary way. But I'm an optimist, or else I couldn't have worked in sustainability for so many years. So if you'll indulge me, I'll spend a little bit of time looking back at when my engineering career started, what the differences are now and into the future, and then why finance is so critical to that journey. So I joined the Green Revolution in 1991, perhaps not realising that it was a revolution. I was looking at the options for university that were coming together in Australia, and I wanted something that brought together my science passion with having an impact in the world. And I can remember reading about this new degree called environmental engineering. It was new, and it was illustrated by a picture of a water bird standing in a pond. And it was, half civil engineering, half of what we knew as engineering, and then it was another half of other stuff. So things that the professors thought that environmental engineers should know, like chemistry of the environment, population and community ecology, and biology. In fact, they put so many courses into this degree that after a few years they took about half of them out again, just because there was so much to learn once you were looking at the environment and sustainability. So at this time, in the picture that I hope you see here, we were groundbreakers also for being women in engineering. So this is us in Sydney in 1991. It was the first engineering course in Australia to ever have more than 50% female intake. There were men in the course, we need men there as well. But we had many interviews and a lot of investigation into why were women suddenly attracted into engineering. And I think part of it was this passion to have an impact. Now, our predominantly male lecturers and professors weren't always happy with this new breed of engineers. And in fact, they nicknamed us the giggling engineers. In my industrial training report, which was on how to treat wastewater using reed beds and holding ponds, it was actually originally failed for not being a real engineering solution. You'll be happy to know I protested and it did pass and it got a good mark. But it's what we would now call a nature-based solution. They're much more accepted as part of the engineering dialogue. At first, the Institution of Engineers Australia refused to accept environmental engineering was real engineering. But then I'm happy to say that they came around, and now in the University of New South Wales, the school is called the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So this photo, which was taken at the upside down tree at the University of New South Wales, which is long since gone to make room for other developments on campus. However, that cohort that I studied with continues to go out there. We didn't know what an environmental engineer would do at that time, but we've all gone on to have an impact. And I think that's what drew us together, how engineering can really have an impact. And sometimes when I speak now to the financial world, we hear the terms green and ESG, but where does it come from? What do these terms mean? What are we trying to do with sustainable finance? And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about how when I studied, where sustainability was coming from. So our environmental engineering degree was born in the shadows, or maybe brilliant light, cast by the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future. And this was published in 1987, so just before I started university. The report defined sustainable development, and it still is the most commonly used phrase for sustainable development. So it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it's worth considering that because it says that sustainability and sustainable development has a temporal aspect. It's not just what we do today, it's what is that impact going to be in the future. Before that, quite well before that, the Club of Rome published their Limits to Growth document in 1972. I'm happy to say I wasn't at university then. But it raised the concept that economic growth could not continue indefinitely because modelling suggests that you would eventually reach a state of resource depletion. Now, at this time, it was a radical concept because the commons of the environment, like the forests and our oceans, were considered too big to fail by most. So in 1991, when I was starting my career, the Council of the Club of Rome published a book called The First Global Revolution, coming back to this concept of a revolution, which covered topics such as global warming, income inequality, the North-South divide, and how these global challenges would create a new world order. That was radical thinking back in 1991. So in this context, we had the first Rio Earth Summit in 1992. The Rio Declaration on Environment and Development was seminal thinking in the way we wanted to work in harmony with nature. It defined the rights of people to be involved in the development of their economies and the responsibilities of human beings to safeguard the common environment. Importantly, for discussions now, it defined the idea of the polluter pays principle, that the polluter should, in principle, bear the cost of pollution. This principle has come full circle now in the past 30 years, and we're really starting to take a look at carbon taxes and who pays for climate change adaptation and mitigation. It firmly linked the idea of long-term economic development with the environment in partnership with people and society. There's a strong message for those of us training to be a new breed of engineers. There was optimism that although there were problems, there were definitions and there were ideas that we could implement. With our engineering mindset and understanding of the natural environment, we could do this. And I'm sure we could. But quite frankly, despite the many warnings over the years, as a society, we probably haven't moved fast enough. Now, as you know, we've had a few changes in the past few years, and this graphic really went viral in May 2020. So as the world was grappling with new concepts of social distancing, lockdowns, isolation, phrases that really didn't exist in common language before 2020, Canadian cartoonist Graham Mackay created this image. And I think it went viral because it really tapped into a fear that we all have. We were there, you can say, saying, wash your hands, you'll be safe, not realizing this big wave of COVID was going to wash over everybody. Behind that, people were then worried about a recession, and with all of the money that governments were spending on COVID prevention, how would the economy cope? But then even further out beyond that, dwarfing all of these issues, we have climate change. It's difficult to encapsulate a much bigger or more existential threat than climate change. So at the time of publication of this cartoon, there weren't vaccines developed. And now, if we're sitting here in this room, you will have been vaccinated to be able to come here. Those of you online, perhaps you are not, but you have the option of getting a vaccine. And so in some ways, as complex as the COVID-19 pandemic has been, we have been able to find solutions. There have been technological solutions, there's been innovation, there's been investment. However, when we look at climate change, we don't have a vaccine. Few parts of society will remain untouched, whether through changes of the weather, exposure to more extreme weather events, greater exposure to vector-borne diseases, interruption of our global food production systems, or economic shocks that may come about. And that's nothing to say of the waves that may come behind that, when we look at perhaps the interruption of biological systems and the loss of biodiversity. So we can tinker around the edges no longer. To deal with these waves, we're going to need a revolution. And everyone knows that a revolution can be expensive. If we make a shift to a sustainable economy and a sustainable society, working in harmony with nature, it's going to require a fundamental shift in the way we provide and consume energy. From the cars we drive, to how we power our homes, to the food we're eating, and how we move things around the planet. We're going to need to find a way to finance this revolution that is fast, effective, and keeps global warming in check within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that's aligned with the Paris Agreement, and that brings all parts of society with us. If we're to ride out the waves of COVID and then climate change, we need to go and check down the back of the sofa to see if there's any loose change to fund all of this. We're looking at maybe in the order of $150 trillion. So that's a lot of loose change to find. And if we can't find that loose change, then we need to think fast and set up new systems for financing that revolution. One thing I've noticed recently moving from the corporate sector into the finance world is how many zeros get tagged onto most discussions. So in the corporate world, at most when we were talking about turnover, we were talking about perhaps billions of dollars. If I was looking at my budget lines, sadly, much smaller, more like hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the world of finance, we're talking about trillions of dollars. That is a lot of zeros. Now, some of the figures that I'll present today, they're not always consistent, but I think what it shows is the scale of how much finance is needed if we want to move to a low-carbon economy. So in advance of the UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, that happened in Glasgow 2021, Janet Yellen, US Secretary of the Treasury, when reflecting upon her first speech about climate change that had been some 23 years earlier, and on the situation that she currently found herself in, stated that the flow of capital from carbon-intensive to carbon-neutral investments is probably the most dramatic and predictable economic shift in human history. And I think that sets the context for why we need to finance the Green Revolution. If we look at this world map, and you can see we've brought out the picture of Asia, you realize how important this region is. Asia accounts for about half of global greenhouse gas emissions. To move the needle on global emissions, Asia must move. As a low-lying region, ASEAN is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, especially the high concentration of populations and activity along our coastlines. These effects come in the form of physical impacts, transition impacts, and economic impacts. For instance, economic losses from natural disasters exacerbated by climate change and the risk of stranded assets. But Asia's journey towards a low-carbon future will be different from that of other developed countries, probably from Europe. Asia is at a different stage of development, where demand for affordable energy will continue to grow, especially with rapid urbanization and modernization. However, most countries in Asia are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels for their energy needs. For instance, more than 80% of Southeast Asia's planned fossil fuel generation and their assets exceed the carbon budget under the Paris Agreement. It's not realistic to suddenly just replace fossil fuels with renewables, and Asia can't move as quickly to a European standard of green without curtailing its economic and social development. And as such, Asia needs a progressive transition towards a low-carbon future that's consistent with inclusive economic growth. Significant capital is going to be needed to support the region's transition to a low-carbon economy through investments in green infrastructure, renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate mitigation, and adaptation activities. As a critical enabler of all of these sustainability efforts, in Singapore and across Asia, we have green finance. The financial system can play a pivotal role in channeling capital and resources towards more sustainable activities and incentivizing customers to adopt more sustainable practices. Now, finance seemed to suddenly take center stage last year, and I mentioned COP26 before. This slide shows some of the announcements that were made there relating to finance. So the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, commonly known as GFANZ, announcement at COP26 demonstrated a commitment to financing the green revolution and a commitment to aligning transition activities towards net zero, influencing over $130 trillion worth of private capital committed by over 450 firms across 45 countries. Larry Fink, who some of you may know or have heard of, who's really the rock star of the revolution, said at the time, "There's not a system today where private capital can be rapidly deployed. A union of public and private is needed to quickly put capital working to financing climate change. We need to reimagine finance. We have the most magnificent global capital markets ever imagined, and we can make it happen if we do it together." So looking more on the public side, the Network for Greening the Financial System, or the NGFS, is one such public sector organisation, or multiple organisations who are coming together to the party. Through the NGFS, central banks and supervisors, of which MAS is one, representing countries contributing to approximately 70% of the world's emissions, have committed to issuing guidance to firms on managing climate-related financial risk and very many other things. And I'm proud to say that MAS's Managing Director, Mr. Rabi Menon, has just been named the chairman of the NGFS, representing an ideal opportunity to bring the ASEAN perspective to the international table on both how public and private finance is needed to scale solutions. It's another opportunity to help align public and private capital is through sustainable finance taxonomies. Taxonomies are a crucial tool for unlocking finance because they provide clarity to the market about the activities that can be considered green or sustainable. The ASEAN Taxonomy Board released version 1 of its taxonomy at COP26 to provide a frame for the discussions with the public and private sector stakeholders. A key challenge in developing a regional taxonomy is striking that balance between developing technical criteria that's aligned with science-based trajectory, but also taking into consideration the needs of this region. So whilst providing comparability with other taxonomies, such as those developed by the European Union and China, it's also looking at how do we meet the challenges of this region. For example, around 45 million people, or about 7% of the population in this region, currently don't have access to electricity, and most of them will need to rely on fossil fuels. Many sectors are still energy intensive, and the market is fractured into many small to medium enterprises. How do we get access to all of those? The Asian Development Bank estimates that it's going to take around $3.1 trillion worth of climate-adjusted finance investments between 2016 and 2032. So just to give you an idea of the scale and how fast sustainable finance is moving, I thought I'd take you quickly through some of the markets, so the sustainable bonds and sustainability-themed funds. The sustainable bond market, which includes green bonds, social bonds, and mixed sustainability bonds, which are a mix of green and social, has seen enormous growth in the compound annual growth rate since the first green bond was launched just over a decade ago. So this is a relatively new tool. Based on 2020's explosive growth, social and mixed bonds are rapidly catching up to the green bond segment, which is the leader at the moment, and becoming increasingly popular tools for financing the Sustainable Development Goals and its related activities. Despite an annual average growth rate of 67% and significant size in absolute terms, the sustainable bond market is still very much in an early growth stage, representing only around 1.26% of the total global bond market, which is approximately 119 trillion. I told you there'd be a lot of zeros mentioned. This suggests that there's enormous potential for growth going forward. By 2025, the sustainable bond market could reach 5% of the total global market, which would bring over $6 trillion of new investments into the Sustainable Development Goals and the sectors that they're representing. That's when we're really starting to talk about financing the green revolution. Assets under management of sustainable funds have quadrupled in the last 5 years, and last year alone they nearly doubled. The exceptional growth is held for the sustainable mutual funds and the ESG exchange traded funds, which now represent 3.3% of assets and all open-ended funds worldwide. Institutional investors, such as pension and insurance funds, are increasingly prioritizing sustainability in their investment decisions, particularly in view of long-term obligations for material risks that are posed by climate change and other sustainability-related crises. They're increasingly convinced that to pivot to sustainable investment doesn't necessarily entail an opportunity cost. If we broaden our perspective away from climate finance only and start to look more towards the Sustainable Development Goals, we start to see how interrelated these issues really are. Sustainable development practices will help countries to be resilient towards the challenges posed by climate change, protect important natural resources, and ensure an inclusive growth for today's generation and the next. The UN estimates that Asia needs to invest around $1.5 trillion annually to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. That's critical to raise direct and new capital towards the SDGs, which must have the balance of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. What I draw your attention to is that at the moment capital is going primarily towards energy systems and transportation. To achieve sustainability, we'll also need that financing to go into other sectors as well. So industry and manufacturing and food and agriculture are two very important sectors for this region. In what's called the climate tech mismatch, a study by PwC and Strategy And showed that those two segments represent around 50% of emissions globally, and yet they currently attract around 20% of global climate tech venture fund investment. SDG 14, Life Below Water, which is an SDG that I'm very passionate about, remains the least funded of the UN SDG goals. And yet, the oceans help to regulate the Earth's temperature. They provide food and livelihoods for billions of people. The ocean is a carbon sink, and it's potentially a source of blue carbon credits and offsets. So although we talk about the green revolution, in reality, the revolution has to be in technicolor. So what are we doing here in Singapore? I thought I'd briefly take a moment to talk about the approach that the Monetary Authority of Singapore is taking in incorporating climate change and sustainability across its different roles and functions. So MAS is unusual in that it does have multiple functions compared to, say, other central banks around the world. So as a central bank and financial regulator, MAS will work with financial institutions to strengthen Singapore's financial system's resilience to environmental shocks and climate change. As a promoter of Singapore as an international finance centre, we'll work with financial institutions and other supporting organisations to develop a vibrant green finance ecosystem to support Asia's transition towards a low-carbon future and a sustainable economy. As the guardian of Singapore's official foreign reserves, MAS will integrate climate risks and opportunities into the investment framework. And as a promoter of technology, MAS is working with the fintech community to harness the power of green fintech, to consider how we can help make data and disclosures discoverable, comparable, and grounded in impact measurement. In addition to this, MAS recognises that intensive capacity building is needed to ensure that Asia's labour pool is ready to take on new green jobs for the future. As the green economy is created and evolved, it's imperative to ensure that transition pathways are developed for old jobs in carbon-intensive sectors so that workers are not left behind in this shift to a low-carbon economy. The S part of ESG is vitally important to make sure we have consider the concept of a fair and just transition. In Singapore, we've committed to ensuring that workers and local enterprises are upskilled and supported to adopt sustainability practices so that they're not left behind in this transition. Too often I think we look at the green transition in terms of managing the cost and the risks. But the risks are usually to capital rather than to people or the environment. And as I've just spent some time outlining, the costs are significant. But being an optimist, I think we also need to look at the opportunities that this technicolor revolution will bring. New jobs, new growth areas. This slide shows the size and the scale of some of those opportunities. Going back to a quote from Larry Fink again, as I said, he is very quotable. He recently said that he believes the next 1,000 unicorns, companies that have a market valuation of over $1 billion, won't be search engines or media companies. They'll be businesses developing green hydrogen, green agriculture, green steel, and green cement. Otherwise put, the International Energy Agency analyst says that about half of the reductions to get to net zero emissions in 2050 will come from technologies that are not yet ready for market and that will require significant investment. I start out by saying that I'm an optimist, and I want to end this presentation on a high note. We have many options for how the Green Revolution will play out. It can be coordinated and an orderly and just transition for the future. We can proactively decide that we won't strand assets, and by that I mean coal-fired power stations and perhaps gas and infrastructure, with all the concrete and steel and embodied labour that they represent. We can proactively decide that a just transition means access to energy, clean water, food and shelter is a basic human right, and that we will as a society ensure the highest priorities are met. Or we could have a messy and chaotic revolution with no real vision for the future that we want to create for ourselves and future generations. So I had the honour to interview Yishen Wong at the Singapore FinTech Festival in 2021. Yishen served as the CEO of Reddit and the Director of Engineering at Facebook and was an early engineer at PayPal, so truly a star of Silicon Valley. In 2019, he turned his attention to climate change and formed a company called Terraformation. Terraformation's mission is to rapidly scale native forest restoration projects around the world that capture carbon and reverse the impacts of climate change. Yishen partnered with forestry and financial service experts to identify and solve some of the largest bottlenecks holding back rapid reforestation, including water and land availability, technical training, and financing. He recently completed construction of the world's largest fully off-grid, 100% solar-powered desalination system to alleviate water shortages that hinder arid ecosystem restoration. He said that the lessons he learned from Silicon Valley were less about tech and more about scalability. And with Terraformation, he'd solved some real-world problems by planting trees that are native to their local regions, generating water to feed the trees, and working out how the systems he was creating could be self-sustaining and create a positive impact for the environment, society, and economy. And I thought that was great to hear coming from someone from the tech world. And researching about him ahead of the interview, I found out that he was sponsoring a competition on solar punk art and hadn't really heard of solar punk art before. So I asked Yishen all about what it was and what it meant to him. So he spoke of how many future visions of what the world will look like are quite dystopian. And if I think about some of the films I grew up watching, the future really did look pretty bleak. You know, once you got beyond the Jetsons, which was quite a happy cartoon, you know, Blade Runner, The Fifth Element, nice places to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. Solar punk is this concept of a bright, colourful, optimistic future where technology and nature can live happily together. It's filled with sky gardens and solar and wind power and harmony. You can laugh at this vision of being unreal, but I've seen it coming. Working in the food industry prior to my current role, I've seen fish and plants coexisting and thriving, each supporting each other in a sustainable aquaculture food system. I've got a friend whose retirement plan is to become a seaweed farmer and sit on a deck chair on the beach and watch her crop grow and produce food while she relaxes. I've seen the cell-based meats where you can directly grow your steak from a Petri dish rather than a whole cow that needs to be raised, then slaughtered, transported for processing, and then transported around the world, to say nothing of the suffering of the animal itself. Almost all of these activities, however, do need significant financing to get them off the ground and reach a commercial scale. And when I think about the future, I want a world where my children and their children can swim in the ocean, breathe the air, see wild animals in nature, hug a family member, and enjoy a good quality of life at harmony with nature. And in Singapore, I see some of that optimism. I see a small island that makes more than most of its resources: vertical farms, solar power, and a tech-enabled society. Singapore's gardens by the bay, which are almost visible out the window, surely epitomise a solar punk optimism. A feat of engineering. Built on reclaimed land, the Flower Dome is the world's largest glass greenhouse. The cloud forest has the world's tallest indoor waterfall. The grove of super trees serve multiple functions, from the voltaic cells on their canopies that harvest solar energy for lighting up the super trees, to releasing hot, humid air from the residual heat from the cogeneration plant. Not unlike the project that almost got me a fail when I did engineering, the lake system uses aquatic plants to filter water runoff from within the gardens, so that can be discharged to the reservoirs and reused. The gardens are truly a sight to behold, and in fact an international tourist destination. When I look around Singapore, I see solar punk beauty with its optimism for the future. I see engineering for sustainable development. The revolution is coming. Of that there is no doubt. Let's invest in our future and finance that Technicolor revolution for the benefit of people and the planet. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Chairman, Centre of Livable Cities, Ministry of National Development, and Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities, SUTD. Please help me welcome Professor Cheong, Koon, Hean.
Good morning, everyone. Your Excellency, colleagues, friends from IES, to the distinguished speakers, and also all who are online. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm really very happy to join you today for this conference, and I'm really honored to be part of a panel of many distinguished speakers that we've just heard. Well, I'm sure that we have talked about the UN's 17 SDG goals, and which the UN has targeted to achieve by 2030. We have certainly set lofty goals, but where are we today? Unfortunately, based on the 2021 SDG Progress Report, in fact this slide also needs some updating, Asia Pacific will only meet less than 10% of the SDG goals by 2030. I think the previous report, they were a little bit more optimistic. That number has dropped. And we have regressed in some of the indicators, which Darian actually talked about, life below the sea. Now I know why, because we're not funding studies and research in this area. And the ones that regress, half of them are actually related to the environment. And of course, the pandemic has also accelerated the pre-pandemic trends. Well, COVID-19 has impacted the Asia-Pacific region in many areas. These include jobs, informal sector, fiscal and financial stimulus that is draining coffers. There's impact on the environment, which I want to focus on. Lots of things, social protection, basic services, social cohesion, health of the population, and even statistical operations. Do you know how hard it is to collect statistics? I know because now that I'm in SUTD, we do research, and it's so hard to do research in collecting data during the pandemic. But more specifically in the area of the environment, 85% of the countries have no environmental considerations in their recovery plans. And 154 to 280 tons more medical waste are produced every day in some big cities, and we are contributing to it. And CO2 emissions rose as lockdown measures are lifted. More bad news. Climate change is widespread, rapid and intensifying. And in the 6th IPCC report, some changes such as sea level rises are irreversible. And the chance of crossing global warming level of 1.5 degrees centigrade is going to be very high. And of course, then the world gets together in the Paris Agreement, in COP21, COP26. We're trying very hard to limit global temperature increases to below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees. And we all pledge to reduce greenhouse gases, to formulate our national adaptation plans, and reaffirm building clean, climate-resilient futures. And of course, there's this famous debate over, do we phase out or do we phase down the use of coal in COP26? I think phase down won rather than phase out, unfortunately. So the question really is, are we serious about sustainability? I love the idea of this very optimistic world that we're going to have, but we have to try to get there. So we're entering a period of climate emergency, and our trajectory of irresponsible and unsustainable development is really fast depleting the world's resources. So how can we be serious about sustainability? And all of us here as built professionals, engineers, I'm an architect and planner. we can certainly play an important role in contributing to the sustainability effort and to help combat climate change. But we need to take integrated action towards building what I call climate-compatible developments. What do I mean? Well, today, infrastructure development is responsible for 79% of all greenhouse gas emissions and accounts for 88% of all adaptation costs. And you will note that the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with energy, transport, and the building sectors. And in an increasingly connected world, we can expect emissions from the digital communication sector to rise in time to come. The infrastructure sector influences 92% of the SDG targets. So this huge scale of influence really offers a unique opportunity for infrastructure investments, as Darian has pointed out, and development to help countries get back on track to meet the UN SDGs, to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and also accelerate recovery from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. As highlighted in a United Nations Office for Project Services report in 2021, infrastructure plays a critical role. And the concept of climate-compatible development really sits at the intersection of climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and sustainable development. Balancing these outcomes require the right infrastructure to be done well, and so that we can provide the maximum benefit for each dimension. But we cannot solve one infrastructure issue at a time without understanding how they interrelate and what their impacts are on people and the planet in the long term. There must be coherence in coordinating global and national goals with detailed implementation. And at a more detailed level, decision makers and practitioners must also take integrated action across all stages of the infrastructure life cycle, from planning to delivery to management and demolition, to ensure that they incorporate climate adaptation and mitigation measures while still aiming for long-term sustainability. So the infrastructure decisions of today must meet the development and climate needs of tomorrow. We have to keep thinking about that. So how do we take this integrated approach? I would like to just share a possible framework for consideration, something we can keep in mind, and it's really probably not new, particularly to those of you in Singapore. I think the first step is to understand what are the international agreed global goals. All right? And in the second step, we need to then factor these global targets into our own long-term plans and infrastructure development. And taking a very long-term approach is important to help us to understand what are the policy trade-offs in the development of infrastructure. It also helps us to understand where limited resources should be allocated. Money is never enough, so where do we put it? And this helps us to understand it. And which practical actions should be prioritized to maximize progress? Resources are never enough. I spent 30, 40 years of my life trying to do this, do development, build, including Marina Bay. And it's all about prioritizing your resources and managing all the competing needs. Now, after that, of course, national policy commitments need to be developed. And these have to be aligned to the sustainability goals and the mitigation and adaptation plans. Government plays an important upstream role in these upstream phases of the life cycle, because as part of the strategic planning, project prioritization, and preparation process. And finally, to ensure our goals are met, we need to set out very clear KPIs for all our projects at different scales, at district, at town level, and to individual projects. And of course, implementation issues would need to be fed back into the long-term planning process to make further adjustments for the future. Now, to illustrate this process, I would like to use the case example of Singapore because I'm familiar with it, and because we have tried to do a lot of things. Not that Singapore has all the answers, it is still very much a work in progress, but we have started to take an integrated approach in our infrastructure development for quite a long time. So Singapore has aligned its goals to that of the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement. These goals are then cascaded into our long-term plans as well as our nationally determined contribution. Two of our long-term plans which are very important are the concept plan and our national infrastructure plan. So those in Singapore will be familiar with the concept plan. I want to say that it is absolutely essential to synchronize our infrastructure with long-term urban planning. Why? Well, we have a concept plan which has a very long-term horizon of about 30 to 40 years of the way we're going to develop Singapore. Singapore is a small city-state with no resources, no land, no natural resources. So the planning is always existential. If we don't plan, we'll be in big trouble. And this plan is updated every 5 to 10 years. The plan factors in livability, sustainability, and resilience right from the start, and it identifies key growth and rejuvenation areas. And based on the concept plan, we can then project and anticipate our infrastructure needs. The long-term approach enables us to decide on that difficult trade-offs. Do I put my money here or do I put my money there? And it will result in more coordinated infrastructure, matched with development needs, and minimize ad hoc and siloed infrastructure decisions. And we also have M&D's Infrastructure Implementation Planning Office that plays a very important coordinating role. So one very good example is in the planning of transportation. Where do you put the MRT line? It has to follow where the land use goes. Where it is decentralized into polycenters, that's where you bring the MRT line to service these nodes. And it also actually makes the MRT viable because you need to collect the commuter load. If you have planned the MRT in the wrong way, you don't get the commuter load. And our long-term plans are then further cascaded into more detailed national policy commitments. We have multiple plans, such as the nationally determined contributions and our long-term low emission goals, the Green Plan 2030, GreenGov.sg, Green Building Master Plan, and adaptation plans. So for our foreign friends who are tuning, you can see that Singapore comprises a whole nation of planners. We're always planning and planning ahead. So we are not new to the sustainability journey. As you can see, the day when we became independent in the 1960s, we had been putting in all sorts of sustainability plans before sustainability became a very sexy word in the world. As I say, it's existential for us. But I want to highlight two later significant plans. They are our nationally determined contributions and the Singapore Green Plan. So very quickly, the Singapore nationally determined contributions were actually enhanced in 2020, and we've committed to peak our absolute emissions around 2030. And beyond 2030, we have put forth a long-term low emissions development strategy. We aspire to halve the emissions from the 2030 peak and to achieve net zero emissions as soon as viable in the second half of the century. There's a lot of debate on these goals because some people say we should push it harder, and I think that is something that's being considered. But to achieve this, the three thrusts are adopted to transform our industry, our economy, and our society, making adjustments to the way we use energy, ensuring carbon efficiency, and to conserve energy. The second sector, is to look at harnessing emerging technologies as they mature. So we talked a lot about R&D, how to increase our energy efficiency, can we decarbonize our grid, our industries, and our buildings. And we're also looking at technologies like carbon capture, CCUs, utilization and storage, and low carbon hydrogen, which we have talked about just now, and to pursue and leverage international collaborations. And of course, we are working very hard to reduce emissions in gas by using gas, natural gas, to use solar, which is the only form of renewable energy that is possible in Singapore, to look at regional power grids. tapping on the region and looking for emerging low-carbon alternatives. The Singapore Green Plan 2030 is our national roadmap towards sustainable development and net zero emissions. The Green Plan sets out concrete initiatives and targets over the next 5 decades under 5 pillars: city nature, energy reset, sustainable living, and green economy. I won't go into detail. You can read all about this in the website. greengov.sg is about the government committing the public sector to taking the lead on sustainability under the greengov.sg initiative. And we've set ambitious targets for the public sector to peak emissions around 2025, ahead of the national target. It's a very tough call and working very hard on it. So that is greengov.sg. And of course, the Building Construction Authority has its Singapore Green Building Master Plan. I think all those in Singapore were impacted and affected by this, and it has set out an 80-80-80 goal, which means 80% of all buildings in Singapore, both new and existing, to be green, 80% of new developments by gross floor area to be super low energy buildings, and achieve 80% improvement in energy efficiency for best in class buildings. I think all of you calculating to get your green mark is very familiar with this. And of course, there are a lot of transportation targets, using EVs, cutting down diesel, and with 2030 targets to use cleaner energy models from 2030 and targeting 600,000 EV charging points by 2030. Singapore also has charted out its adaptation measures, covering 6 major areas, as I've indicated here. I will not go into detail. It looks into coastal protection, it looks at building and infrastructure, our network infrastructure, biodiversity and greenery, public health and food security, and ways to mitigate the urban heat island effect. I think this on itself is going to be a long conversation to go through it. Now, having settled on the national policy commitments, these have to be cascaded into detailed implementation. And when we cascade this down to our projects, there's a need to set out very clear sustainable strategy and specific measurable KPIs to guide the entire life cycle development process. I always say, if you can't measure it, you're not going to hit those targets. You have to measure it. You have to have the KPIs. And of course, our infrastructure development should be highly coordinated, integrated, and take a systems approach. I believe the key guiding principles for infrastructure development must be circularity, multifunctionality, and we should harness technology to build intelligent infrastructure. So we talk about circular economy and being digital, so that we can be resource efficient, reliable, and safe. So all these are very academic and boxes on a chart. So I would like to illustrate how we can actually integrate such detailed planning with a case example of HDB's latest town, Tengah Town, a project that I worked on. It is still very much a work in progress, but we really try to adopt an integrated approach for this town. Tengah is actually the latest generation public housing town. It comprised about 42,000 dwelling units of affordable housing for live, work, play, and learn in hopefully a wonderful environment. And as Tengah spans between the western and the central catchment areas, it has been conceptualized as a forest town, though it's a dense town, to serve as an ecological corridor between the two nature areas. And as a start, in the development of HDB towns, HDB is guided by a sustainable development framework which we worked out in 2011. And the framework sets out the goals, as I say, clear goals, strategies, and initiatives to cover environmental, social, and economic aspects. This is a very tiny diagram. If you zoom in into this diagram, and I'm only going to pick 2 segments covering mainly the environment, you will see that objectives of having low carbon development, reduce waste, and say adequacy of water is cascaded into very detailed strategies and initiatives. And if you study these initiatives, they are all trying to hit the mitigation objectives nationally. So that's why I'm saying global, national, cascaded to project in great detail, right? It covers goals that will hit the BCA green mark, covering waste, which is all the NEA goals, like circular economy approach, zero waste nation, resource efficiency, and water, how to be resource efficient with water. And if you look at other segments, it covers both mitigation and adaptation objectives, right? Whether adaptation would cover things like biodiversity and greenery, or flood drainage and protection. I can't cover each of these strands in detail, but it's probably on the website and you can read it. But I just want to make the point about why it has to cascade into great detail when we implement. And an interesting point about implementation is in developing the sustainability initiatives, there will inevitably be conflicting requirements that require trade-offs. And to deal with this, HDB has developed a complex systems model, a decision-making tool to determine the interactions and trade-offs of the various urban solutions to achieve sustainability goals. Okay, I'm trying to move to the next slide. It's frozen, but I will talk about it. For example, the use of the pneumatic waste conveying system actually requires more energy, and HDB has introduced this. But it is more manpower productive in the long run, resource efficiency. So what do? We know that this additional energy cost will have to be offset, and we do it by the deployment of solar panels to generate renewable energy. So it's not about looking at bits and pieces. It's about knowing that all of them have trade-offs, and in the end you have to choose the most optimal combination of sustainable initiatives. There's no perfect answer. You have to do the trade-off, right? And HDB tries very hard to put in indicators. Actually, I'm just giving you a sample. They have many, many indicators, which they are probably, some of it still being worked out, some of it we may have hit, some we may not, and we are working on it, all right? And so in the planning, there are six, the master plan is designed with 6 big ideas, trying to introduce green and evergreen forest town, making sure we can walk and cycle everywhere, people can move around easily, beautifully crafted districts with very clear identities, building of close-knit communities, and building a sustainable and smart town. So we are very mindful that every district needs to be quite unique in its design, so that planners and architects try very hard to shape this. At a local level within the neighborhoods, a lot of new space for community gardening and urban farming will be introduced. Can you imagine doing urban farming in a HDB estate on a big scale? Well, we hope that Tengah will achieve that. And there are lots of linear community farmways that straddle through the residential areas. The designs of the farmways are exactly adjacent to the precincts. They are guided by what we call a biophilic town framework. There is a lot of science to planting. People just think plant. It's not so simple. But this biophilic framework is really to achieve a greater sense of place, better well-being, and enhanced quality of living through the dimensions of flora and fauna, water, people, outdoor comfort, and soil. So actually this framework, for those interested, I believe is on the website. We put it out on the website after we did the R&D. All right, so you're most welcome to have a look. All right, and also it's about making access convenient. So the town will be served by the Jurong Region Line, bus interchanges, autonomous buses and shuttles will be introduced, and also EV-ready car park lots. And at a local level, Tengah is planned to promote active mobility. There are 3.5 meter wide commuter paths on both sides of the roads. There are 4 meter shared paths and lots of cycling paths. And you'll find that by the time it's done, Tengah will have one of the densest cycling networks amongst all the towns. And one big move is to make the town center car-free. And there's a lot of design thought that has gone into this. This is only at the concept stage. I believe HDB will plan it such that all the roads, the bus interchanges, preferably goes underground. So the entire town is walkable. All right. Lots of details still to be worked out, and I do hope that HDB will follow through with this vision. And Tengah is also developed as a smart public housing town. We deploy digital technology to develop towns that are livable, efficient, sustainable, and safe. So that is very important. So digital technology helps a lot. So just for example, in the way we plan, right? We do a lot of wind flow analysis. I mean, we really develop digital twins for the towns. All right, doing wind flow analysis, solar irradiance studies, noise modeling. This helps planners and architects to shape the town to minimize some of the problems that we're likely to face, and to harness the power of the solar. Where there's plenty of sunshine through your solar irradiance study, that's where we put the solar panels, and in the shade, we put the playgrounds. So it's important to guide urban designers and planners. And of course, noise is becoming one of the most difficult problems in the world for all cities. So we do try to do noise simulations and then adjust the design to mitigate. And we have put in a lot of sensors. Okay, I'll talk while I wait for the slide to change. There have been many smart applications introduced. For example, smart lighting. We will have lighting that monitors the amount of traffic. Where there's very little human traffic, the lighting tunes down and saves a lot of energy. See, yeah, there we are. Get back the slide. That's just one example, and there are many, many smart applications that have been introduced. I will give you a couple of examples. But, you know, different aspects of the estate services, such as lighting, waste, pumps, they are fully monitored through sensors from the start. And all this data is pumped into the smart hub. And this enables HDB to monitor the efficiency, the reliability, and even the quality of the devices. Over time, I'm sure HDB will know which lift make is better than another. So this I'm telling the suppliers. In time to come, you will be compared with all lift suppliers. So better make sure the quality of your product is good. Same as pumps, same as lights. So I think the manufacturers and suppliers must step up, because all this data collected we'll be able to compare which products are actually better and to improve reliability. All right. And also HDB is developing Tengah as a smart energy town, and HDB is working with Singapore Power to develop a platform tapping on AI to optimize energy and promote energy conservation across the town. So for example, in times of high energy demand and poor prices, the charging of EV can be deferred, and electricity supply can be drawn directly from the solar panels if it is sunny, or batteries if it is raining, instead of from the grid. And the platform will make use of consumption data, weather data, net load information to train machine learning models, which will enable HDB to detect anomalies and make decisions at a system level. That's why I say not individual things, but at a system level. All homes in Tengah, and this is public housing, will be smart enabled. All the homes will come equipped with smart switch sockets, outlets, and a smart distribution board, which means that residents can subscribe to smart home solutions, monitor their energy and water, and then hope that influences their consumption, reduce consumption. And HDB is also exploring with other agencies like PUB to have things like smart showers, smart meters in the home. Smart living is important, all right? So for example, the homes can come equipped with smart solutions like telehealth. Telehealth has become so important with the pandemic, and now we know it is a very useful smart application. Elderly monitoring systems, where sensors can monitor elderly at home. And of course, smart mobility, and data has been used extensively to help manage traffic and reduce congestion. Those of us in Singapore are very familiar. But Singapore will be introducing the next generation ERP, that should be rolled out by LTA. I think it's been slightly delayed. And this new system leverages global navigation satellite systems. All our car onboard units will change soon. Okay? And we've also, HDB has developed smart parking. It's been trialed in Punggol. In time to come, when we go into car park, no gantries, no coupons, just drive in and then just drive out. All right, it will be account based. It's been tried successfully. I saw this before I left HDB, and I think it will be scaled up. Very convenient for everyone, but also means that you can't cheat on your coupons. And of course, HDB also looks into building technology and trying to have a smart integrated construction system. This R&D is ongoing. I'm sure they have advanced slightly by now. The objectives are really to achieve resource optimization and manpower efficiency. And I think in time to come, if they're not looking at it already, it is important to further decarbonize the construction process and the use of materials. This is going to be a very tough one for the construction industry. Now, I want to say that it's really not just HDB. It's very heartening to see that many companies are starting to have sustainability and ESG goals in their corporate agendas. All right, good examples are city development. I've named developers because they are the builders that hire many of the engineers and the architects, and also capital land. And I think many of them have started to have a corporate agenda. So, in conclusion, just to reiterate what I've said, infrastructure really plays a critical role in addressing sustainability and climate change. We have to build climate compatible development. You have to balance all these dimensions. And to do so, there must be coherence in coordinating and cascading the global to the national, to the town, district, and individual project level with clear initiatives and KPIs that you can measure. And we have to, at a detail level, think about the infrastructure cycle from planning to delivery to management and demolition to ensure we are going to meet those targets and goals. So I say again, the infrastructure decisions of today must meet the development and climate needs of tomorrow. And only then maybe we can look to this very optimistic future that has been painted for us. Thank you very much.
Well, let me begin by saying Institution of Engineers Singapore, proud to bring very prestigious Charles Riady Distinguished Lecture Series. This year the theme is Digital and Circular Economy on the occasion of World Engineering Day, Sustainable Development as endorsed by UNESCO. Thanks to all the audience in person, in auditorium, especially Excellency European Ambassador to Singapore, as well as all the guests. More than 2,000 online participants. A warm welcome to this particular distinguished seminar series. This is distinguished because you can see on my right side, on my left side, highly accomplished sustainability champions, advocates, as well as leaders in diverse sectors of economy and society. We have about 50 minutes. Objective of this particular panel discussion is to learn from these accomplished, passionate individuals, from their personal journey, so that we need some music because it's close to the lunch. I was told that we need to wake up with our coffee. That's a good one. Well, the thing is, as a moderator, my role is to provide a collective mind of more than 2,500 people, not only sitting here, but in the audience, on the internet, They like to learn from these accomplished, outstanding panelists. Should they make this journey of sustainability part of their career, part of their future? Should they lead their businesses towards sustainability? So something like that is what they would like to hear through the panel discussion. So my moderation questions would be along those lines. Just forget me that I'm a professor at the National University of Singapore. So this would be your collective mind. The questions that are coming from you through the Q&A posted on the Zoom session, as well as later on we'll ask the audience in person here to raise the questions. We have 50 minutes, probably less than 50 minutes. I would not want to lose any further time. So I will not be introducing these long resume eminent speakers on the panel, then we will not have much time to talk. So you are welcome to read all their resumes posted on the internet. 3 speakers via keynote lectures this morning. They already introduced their organizations, their own activities related to sustainability. So I will start with 2 others who have not spoken today until now. So we'll start with them. Then after that, I will invite panel members to join the discussion. Susanna is on the internet. She's czar of data centers. While she's getting used to the Zoom and tuning into our panel session, I like to invite Mr. Jonathan Hua, my good friend. We know each other for 30 years now. Jonathan, tell us your personal journey towards sustainability, as well as ST Engineering, which has the largest footprint, are based in Singapore as well as abroad. You have about 3 minutes or 5 minutes, somewhere there. Jonathan.
Thank you, Sira. It's really exciting to be here, especially seeing how engineering is transforming the world. I'm from ST Engineering, as you know, and for those of you not familiar, you saw a bit of the what we do, snippets in the video and the stream. We are a diverse business, always interesting and doing impactful stuff. I'm never bored, like I say, and some of you in the audience have been with us also over the years, and I know that's the case. Whether in aerospace or maritime or cities or digital or defense, we've always got something going on. We are committed to sustainability and sustainable growth. So for our 23,000 people across the world, what we try to do constantly is strive to harness technology and innovation for a sustainable and secure world. We try to integrate sustainability in everything we do, whether it's business strategy or operations. So we focus on sustainability and not sustainability or. Now, I know that's difficult, but we want to do that and do our part to work and with the cities. Professor Cheong talked about how Singapore is doing a lot of exciting things. We're part of that as well, and we'll do our part, or more than our part, in wherever we are, whether in Singapore or US or Europe or in Asia or around the world. But in addition to that, we want to focus a lot on enabling our customers on their sustainability journeys. So you know our customers are city governments, you know they're airlines, and it's all very challenging as you see that big tsunami of climate change coming. But we want to do our part to help them, and we have been doing so across our many different products and solutions. I'll share some of that later on, how each of some of the things we do help our businesses and customers, but also the consumer and all of you out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for sticking to the time as well as giving the succinct way how sustainability is championed by ST Engineering, one of our major engineering company in Singapore. Susanna, if you can hear us, you're still with us on the Zoom. You are representing heart of the digital technologies, which is data centers. Digital technologies, what we call big tech, would not be possible without an effective functioning of a data center. And of course, data centers are also being subjected to questions about their energy guzzling nature. And obviously, sustainability of data centers is central. Susanna, if you're there, could you tell us your association with the data centers more than 30 plus years? You and I have been interacting for several years now. Please tell the audience your own personal journey, passion towards sustainability and data centers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the honor to include me in your event. My name is Susanna. I'm connecting with you virtually from the Silicon Valley, California, USA. I guess this is a demonstration of how digital transformation works, as if I'm actually there in person. And I do hope to have the opportunity to meet you all in person in 2022. I'm a computer scientist, an NG fellow from Stanford University. I collaborate with a professor from NUS, and I really admire your university. I work in a data center in the past 30 years, have led over 3 gigawatts of renewable energy projects in the different stages of the data center life cycle, starting from design, site selection, data center build, and manage the operation 24/7 across 17 countries as my role as ex-COO for eBay International. I actually lived in Singapore, worked in Depot Road as a head of Hewlett Packard Asia Pacific Data Center Communication Services, supporting the telco and the financial services client. But I returned to the US running the worldwide data center operation at Sun Microsystem. My passion is actually working with the entrepreneur to now bring their vision to commercial success in sustainability. Concurrently, I also work in the energy sector and as an advisor for the data center sector for the UN SDG. I actively engage with the private sector leadership in the data center and ICT sector, and that include Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, or Meta, Apple, enterprise data clients such as Goldman Sachs, and academia such as Johns Hopkins, and many electric grid providers. And what we basically do is to foster research and collaboration in goal setting, such as the carbon neutral pledge that you all might have heard prior to the COP26 that enacted into the Paris Agreement. The focus now, however, is to actually take action. This is basically what I like to do, is to build sustainable development projects, call it net zero data center, to exemplify the vision of the UN Sustainable Development Goal. I learned significantly from Professor Siram in terms of his leadership. I call him the rock star in Singapore, to really pilot and perfect the circular economy. And we must actually invert the status quo of doing things in a linear fashion to adopt the circular economy as we build data center. In one of his papers he's published, Singapore emitted 52 million tons of CO2 in 2017 and continue to rise. So the net zero data center that we work on has the ability to actually reuse the CO2 in the emission to provide district heating and cooling. And those are some of the things that we're basically working on. And I developed a framework on a 5-pillar that we can actually be able to achieve carbon neutrality and at the same time measure the success, given the previous speaker basically said the goal is not meaningful unless we can actually measure it. So I look forward to participating in this panel to tell you more about the 5 pillars that I have developed, and I also wrote a white paper that I'm glad to make it available to the audience. And with that, many of the work that we've done with a gigawatt of data center being built and a carbon neutrality plan, I was voted as a Planet 50, which is the topmost influential people in the world in terms of achieving carbon neutral future. Back to you, Professor.
Thank you, Susanna. Well, you all realize that we have 3 keynote speakers who are also sharing the panel session today. To give them some breather as well as recapture their minds to refresh with new ideas, I will start in the reverse order so that the first keynote speaker will address the panel session, followed with the second one, followed by the third one, so that everyone has a time to regroup their thoughts and add more than what they already said in their eloquent, insightful keynote speeches. I'd like to begin with Sheila. I know it's far away for you from California, and you're still doing very well. You're beating the jet lag. You're still smiling. We're very happy about that. And we'd like to ask you, Sheila, you notice majority of the panelists today are women. And we're very happy about it. Instead of Institutional Engineering Singapore is very proud that we actually could bring such a highly accomplished woman that will relate to sustainability, share their experiences. I would like to ask you your own personal journey with respect to sustainability and how you are making a difference at a large company like Woei, please.
Great. Well, thank you. That's a big question, right? First of all, it's been great to be a part of this panel, and for me, what has been inspiring is how interconnected. And so one of the things that I personally have enjoyed about the role that I have in sustainability is the fact that I get to talk to many more people than just aerospace. We're talking to sectors that I would have never thought that we had a relationship to, such as agriculture or chemical production, or the different technologies and digital technologies with Apple or Microsoft. We do business with them, but now we're interrelated. So I really enjoy, just like Darian had shared earlier, I enjoy making an impact. And this is such an impactful area. It's something that we have to do. It's a sense of urgency. It's something that this is the decade of action. And that's one thing that inspires me, is taking action. So that's why I enjoy what I'm doing. I've been in aerospace, however, my whole career. And what is interesting for me about aerospace is we've talked about efficiency forever. It's what we do because it makes economic sense for our customers. It improves the environment in the process. But to talk about it through the sustainability lens, it makes you realize that this is a journey that we continue to be on. And so it allows us to elevate what we do. And so that's an exciting part of what we're doing now. Also, taking it into our factories and working with our suppliers, it just creates a different harmony, if that's a good word to use, to work with our entire value chain to be able to make a difference in the world. So that's what inspires me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheila, for sharing your infectious enthusiasm. I'd like to now ask Darian, who's sitting right next to me. If you're wondering, there is a color coordination on this side. Don't imagine too much. We did not coordinate. It just happened. It's a coincidence or serendipity, but we like it. It's good that we have a coordination. We are giving a common front with respect to the sustainability. Don't worry. I'm actually going towards really sustainability with respect to what Darian is going to say. You might be wondering, why is he talking about color coding or fashion? Well, the fashion also contributes a large amount of carbon emissions as well as resource utilization. We will see any of the panel members along the way might address that question. But right now, I like to ask Darian, according to her, what does it mean to be World's Engineering Day Sustainable Development? Because there was a question from the audience. When is this World Engineering Day and why is it Sustainable Development? So this was a question from the internet audience. So please share your thoughts about it.
Professor. And I think maybe the pink color is the color of optimism. And I will say that this is a jacket that I brought with me from Thailand. I used to live in Thailand. And one of the things we don't talk about in sustainability so much is the importance of culture. And culture is what ties us all together, and it is what drives us towards the future. And so fashion and culture definitely play an important role. When I started out in engineering, which many of you heard me speak about, there was no concept that there would ever be a World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development. I think we were considered oddities. I studied with civil engineers, and we used to joke that their tagline was just concrete it, along the theory of what Nike said, just do it. But to have World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development shows that thinking has gone on. Rather than man versus nature, I think it's people in collaboration or in harmony with the environment. The Sustainable Development Goals has helped us see that, across that range of 17 different colors, I think the colorful aspect and the multifaceted nature of the Sustainable Development Goals helps us realize how interconnected people, planet, and the economy really is, and that you can't advance only one. If you're looking at the three capitals, you have your economic capital, you've got your natural capital, and you have your human capital. And you need to work with all three, because if only one succeeds, if only the economic capital is succeeding, you can't have a functioning society if the human capital and the natural capital are suffering. So to me, having World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development is recognizing the vital role that engineers play in translating concepts and science and practicality into what's happening on the ground. So going back to Sheila's point about impact, how do we actually bring these changes about? How do we make the changes on the ground so that we can have a sustainable future?
Thank you, Darian. May I shift my attention to my right side, and right next to me, Professor Cheong Koon. She already explained in detail the role of infrastructure, urbanization, importance of these two in world meeting the targets of carbon neutrality or net zero. There is a question from the audience. They were asking, who are the biggest culprits behind the carbon emissions? And so I rephrase it so that you have a chance to address it. Essentially, the same person who put the question on the online, he or she alluded that governments and businesses are the major culprits behind carbon emissions. So the question to you, tell us what more governments and businesses should do so that we can further progress towards reducing carbon emissions and build a sustainable world for all.
That's a difficult question because it's going to take a long time to answer it, but I will try. I think I remember my own journey in sustainability when I first raised it as actually quite a young person, when I raised this and everyone looked at you and say, it's just too difficult to do and why are you raising all these problems? But so I think the first hurdle is really mindset, because a lot of people just didn't believe that climate change is a problem. Neither do they believe that carbon emissions is. But it has shifted, right? The fact that we're all sitting here talking about it and trying to do something about it. So I would say in the last maybe 2 decades, it has shifted, and that's important because first people must agree that, and when I say people, it means the world must agree that it is a problem and we need to deal with it. The urgency is important. So because there was no sense of urgency and it's such a difficult thing to do, nobody moved, right? But when it's very urgent, and I say that the moment it gets to be an existential issue is when people will move. Look at the pandemic, right? When it started, everyone thought it was a China problem, But when it spread, look at the speed at which the vaccines, the community came together to do R&D and came out with the vaccines. It's really super speed. So I think we are probably reaching a stage where climate emergency is upon us. And therefore, now you see movement by governments. Governments play a very, very important role because they are in the upstream cycle, as I mentioned. So government plays a role in doing many things, right? First is to set a national agenda. So I come back to my talk. It has to be a national agenda. Because
dealing with sustainability is about scale. It's all about scale. If you cannot convince the people right at the top, at a national level or a global level, it's very hard to move, right? Yes, we all contribute ground up, but it's not going to move the needle unless there is top line strategic agreement. So the world has, to a certain extent, and governments are now on board, and then it cascades down. So the first hurdle, I think, is mindset, and we are at least well on the way. Governments can set a national agenda. It can set regulations. It can give incentives and disincentives. Carbon tax is a very good example, because by nature, governments have to think long term. Private sector thinks short term. If you're a listed company, you think every half year you have to do a reporting, maybe now every year, right? So you have very short term goals. But government has very long term goals. So it puts in place all the right incentives and disincentives. Government also plays a very important role in enabling scale. I just had a conversation with Jonathan. It's not that we all don't know all the answers and the types of technology to go and try and build more sustainably. The problem is scaling up because of the cost. So the government plays a role, for example, by taking the lead in actually adopting some of these types of technologies. If the government, beyond all the incentives and disincentives and regulation, if the government, say, tomorrow comes up with a green procurement policy, which the EU is implemented, which I'm saying that probably akan datang, so better sit up and think about it, because that might go into all your tender specifications. All manufacturers, suppliers, designers better start thinking about it, right? And government can help to shift the needle for the industry. I remember my own journey in HDB. When we came out with solar, I think we were one of the first few, and I had to subsidize the first tender. But because of the scale in which we push it out, the industry, the price came down. It became feasible to do it. And once it became feasible, everybody else could ride on this wave, because the cost of solar and reuse solar leasing has dropped through. And now we have the Solar Nova program where we aggregated demand. So that's the other role of government, aggregating demand. So I think government can take the lead. But now that the national and the global agendas have been set, it is time for the private sector to be really serious about this. And of course, you will be influenced by the incentives and the disincentives. The carbon tax is a big deal to all businesses. So if you haven't thought about it, better start thinking about it. So I think for each one has a role. But then now there is a role for everybody, all of us here. Consumer behavior can change the industry. Who do you buy from? Who do you patronize, right? Who do you rent from? Which types of developer with the right agenda, corporate agenda? And a lot of people will not now move into a building that is not green, right? So you have to have green buildings, maybe not to save the world, but to save your business. So that's the reality, right? Consumers must demand it, and then that behavior will change. So sorry, long story, but I'm just saying it takes everybody, as the other speakers have talked about, and it's very important right at the top. The mindset is that we have to do it.
Thank you, Koon. Well, I know the internet audience are a little bit concerned about the internet speed at your own places. I just want to alleviate your concern. A recorded version of keynotes, opening address, panel session would be made available, so you could view them at your own pace and time. So I hope that addresses some of the concerns I'm seeing on the chat box. During the break session, we conducted a poll survey, based on which I'm going to frame the next set of questions to the panel members. Let me share the poll results. If the system allow me to share, I hope you all can see it. I know the panelists are in suspense. They don't know what the poll is, which is good. We need to keep the panelists on poll. So I'm going to pick one or two of those poll questions. and then I'll phrase it for the panel members. So while the internet audience, you are being entertained with the poll results, there are 10 poll questions. Many of you answered. Very nice. So I'd like to just bring in the conversation by summary of those results. Most of you felt this net zero target by 2050 may not be achievable, even though we all desire to be. So that's generally your sense. Second one, very interesting, is in your opinion, are the companies doing greenwashing? I see more than 50% believe some form of greenwashing is being done by the companies. I'm not going to ask a follow-on question to the panel members that are representing companies, and I should not put them on the spot about their companies or industry. Rather, I will mix that question with something else so that they would have a chance to broadly answer this question. So I would go to the one more poll survey. Our international speakers or audience may not know, recently Singapore Exchange introduced what they call ESG reporting, environmental social governance reporting, and it is the basis of disclose or comply or explain. That's the basis all the listed companies on Singapore Stock Exchange are required to produce annually ESG reports. Now the question to the panel's members, in your experience or from your own industry sector, how do you see ESG reporting, not only reporting, the standards behind ESG reporting or the variations of ESG? What does that mean to you or your insights or even the board sides about ESG reporting? And perhaps I can just open it up to anyone, or I can call the names.
You're looking at me, so I think I'll jump
Sheila
in.
Is,
the professor is looking at me. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of different reporting structures, and certainly we've tried to address as many of them as we possibly can. I think the next phase is going to be that they'll start to come together, and I think that's important. You know, the reporting structure is really important from a transparency. It's back to the KPIs. If you can't see it and you don't know what people are measuring, it's hard to know if they're actually fulfilling what their sustainability goals are. But the other piece is it's confusing because there's slight different interpretations across all of the different reporting structures, and then the ratings. So there's a plethora of information that also needs to come together so that people can actually have clarity in what they're looking at and comparing and assessing. So that's where I think it will be going, and it's starting to converge, but slowly. It'll probably get a little wider before it comes back together, but it's important to have the transparency. So I would start with that as it's a good step to be able to report.
Thank you, Sheila. We're not going in the sequence. Anybody can jump in.
Okay, maybe I'll just add on. In fact, because this was an issue I was looking on at just recently and still looking at it, there are so many reporting standards out there, right? And but there are global movements that are trying to converge, at least mix and match, of the different standards, the TCDLs and the GRIs, to put together that maybe it just makes sense to have a more coherent and an agreed set of standards to be reported on. But I think the most important thing is get started. It doesn't really matter. Just pick one of the ones that is closest to what your company or your organization is doing and just get started. Because without starting on a reporting, actually it's not the reporting. It's not just because SGX say you have to do a reporting. I think the reporting actually drives action. It is really an audit on yourself. And by reporting, you will know what you're good at and what you're probably not very good at. Where are all the gaps? And hopefully that spurs action. I think that is the more important part of reporting. Is there greenwashing? Absolutely. There's plenty of greenwashing out there. So therefore,
the way you report, the way you measure becomes very important. Well, I want to encourage people, just get started, because by reporting, you will know. Just one more comment is, because I think reporting is actually at quite a nascent stage, frankly, and I've read quite a number of reports. A lot of them are very general, and worse, they become political statements. So I think it's important on what that reporting is supposed to do. As built professionals, I think one area we need to start looking at is to understand the reporting, because the reporting requires data, a lot of data. And to be honest, most of us don't have the data, right? We use proxies, and so it moves into the whole area of your facility management, for example, that we really need to start to put in sensors and all those things that we can then track the performance and then be able to report. So in our design of infrastructure, of buildings, we have to start thinking, linking. You see, we used to put in sensors more for performance, right? Making sure things are reliable, etc. But I think with the reporting, you need to track other things. So maybe that's something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Hean. Jonathan?
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, you can leverage your culture. So as an engineering company, we want to be real, we're data-oriented, as Professor Cheong has said, and we want to do, not just talk, right? So we are focused a lot on understanding what are the things that are relevant, and we try. We don't wait for all the standards to be harmonized and such. We'll be waiting forever. Of course, we're looking all out for the International Sustainability Standards Board recommendations coming out for non-financial reporting, but in the meantime, we go ahead and put what we can out there and make it real and make it relevant to the audience. So I think that's a very practical step for engineering companies and companies that have an engineering culture, because the key is to make sure that everything we do can be backed up. And I'm sure the audience here as well as worldwide agrees with that as engineers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Darian?
Okay, building on all of those, which I think are all very relevant points, I kind of skipped over the large part of what I actually did in my career. But I know I did my first sustainability report against the GRI standard in 2002. So sustainability reporting has been around a long time. If we're still saying it's nascent, I do wonder what we've been doing. But what is important is how you communicate what you're doing and the direction that you're going. I think the beauty of the standards is that they help to drive the change. Certainly, I know reporting against GRI, doing Dow Jones Sustainability Index assessments, all of those things help you keep up with what the trends are and the direction, but making sure that your data is true and verifiable and that your disclosures are real and will help people make an informed decision about what your company is doing or organization is very important. You mentioned the International Sustainability Standards Board. That is trying to bring all of those together, and you will see the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. I don't think the need for disclosure will go away, but what will hopefully improve, and perhaps technology will help us improve that, and certainly at MAS we're looking at the FinTech agenda to help make access to data easier, to make sure the quality of that data is high, and that we're actually reporting and making decisions on comparable data across different organizations and across different sectors.
Thank you, Darian. Susanna, are you there?
Yes.
Well, they're all saying data, and data centers are very important. You are running a cloud data, I can see that.
Yes, my response basically
I will
is
come
this.
to the audience. If Susanna is not able to connect, well, it's fine. So what we will do is we will take one more online question, then we will come to the audience present today in person here. As you notice, we chose a title of our theme, Digital Economy and Circular Economy. Precisely, digital technology is what they call big tech, enables data collection, verification, further projecting information. And we believe it has a close link to the circular economy, which is related to optimizing, improving the resources utilization footprint. The speakers have already said how the carbon emissions reductions are very important. 10 days from now, United Nations Environmental Program is going to meet in Nairobi. The worldwide, many advocates are pushing for setting material reduction targets similar to the carbon emission targets. So it's a matter of time, maybe in a 10 or 15 days time, you will hear a global discussion on that topic. The poll audience also overwhelmingly said, in addition to carbon emission targets, we should have a material reduction target. What it means is we are talking about materials, chemicals, water, and energy reduction targets. Now again, I noticed Sheila in her notes or synopsis, she did say circularity and sustainability are interrelated. So obviously I had to start with Sheila again. Sorry.
So circularity is such an important part of what we do in aerospace. It's very challenging. One of the first things I would say is the aluminum, aerospace grade aluminum. Any of the scrap that we utilize there remains within the aerospace sector because it's so difficult. So there's that element of sustainability. There, the work that we've done in terms of additive manufacturing. So there's a number of things that we do there that improves quality. It reduces waste. It eliminates scrap. We've done that for some of the carbon fiber is a great example. Oftentimes we just think of it as, black aluminum, but it's not. It's an additive approach. And so that is something that we've used and the industry's used, but we use it on our 787. We've done it on some of our winglet work that we've done down in Australia. So that's an element of circularity or, starting to do the additive. And then to really actually do the full circularity, I'll go back to carbon fiber. What we've done there a couple of years ago in working with our team down in Australia, who was kind of leading the way on some of this, was to figure out how we can recycle both cured and uncured carbon. And it was to fulfill our zero waste to landfill goals. But ultimately, we have a fairly new aircraft that's going to eventually come to an end of life, and we had to figure out how do you utilize that material. So there was tons of ideas. So during that creative phase, there's all kinds of crazy, creative, fun ideas. We finally centered up on working with a company that could actually recycle and reuse as a raw material for other industries that cured and uncured carbon fiber. And aerospace grade materials tend to be very different, high standards, and yet it became a better base material, a better raw material for other industries like computer tops, computer formations, as well as the auto industry. So that one is a really powerful, good circularity story, and I think there's going to be far more. When you think about the biofuels that are out there for ground, they're producing ethanol, and ethanol can produce ethylene. So you can imagine some of the other elements that go into the aircraft itself can be produced out of biomaterials. So I think we're early in our industry on this, but I think there's a lot of excitement on the materials and the circularity that we can do going forward. So,
Thank you, Sheila.
Can I add to that, since it's aerospace? So I don't know if you know, but ST Engineering has done 400 passenger to freighter conversions, and that's circular economy. So even before we get to the components, which we hope we can also do together with Sheila and her people, we take 15-year-old passenger planes, for example, that are going out of service. We extend their life for 20 years. And this is not easy. As engineers, you enjoy this. I think you've got to cut a hole in the aircraft, put a cargo door in, strip stuff out, remake it. And what you get is an aircraft that can fly a lot longer. It's more efficient. It's modernized. So our aerospace, mechanical, and electrical engineers work together to make this possible. If you are at the air show, some of you this week, you'll see some of those. But we're looking forward to doing more with Boeing as well as Airbus to make sure that where there's an opportunity, we can take what is already there today and extend the life. Then later, if you have to do scrapping, then all those component technologies can come in. But even if you don't get there, I think there's a lot that engineers in their innovation and creativity can come up with And every time you click on, an online buying thing, remember you are fueling freighters, air freighters. It's good for our business together, but it's also something we want to do more sustainably. So think about it when you click. Don't always buy too much as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Sheila. In view of the time, we will move on to the questions from the in-person audience here. Could a mic go to the gentleman there? Meanwhile, I'd like to say that both Sheila and Jonathan, you are welcome to teach in my class at the National University of Singapore. iChile is a special module, Materials and Sustainability. I think you are more convincing than me in the circularity and opportunity for innovation. Yes, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, the panel speakers. Yeah, I have a very simple question that I'd like to ask, maybe directed to Prof. Cheong. I think Singapore government is trying to promote the use of electric vehicle. I think everybody knows. And of course, it's good for the environment, reduce carbon emission and so on, reduce the damage to our environment. But in electric vehicle, we still use energy. So now you just pass the buck. Last time we used petrol, right? I mean, petroleum, diesel, and so on as fuel. Now we use electric. We have to charge it. And now the problem is we have to buy the energy from the government, or from the power grid. So I think we are not actually reducing we just pass the problem back to the government. Maybe in producing energy to charge all the vehicles in Singapore. And the other biggest problem I think that we have to resolve is how to provide enough charging facility for all the vehicles in Singapore if you want to go to a zero carbon emission. And I think maybe I think there's plans on the way. I'd like to know what they're doing about this. Because if you can't provide enough charging facility, it will end up like our bicycle problems a long time ago. People not enough car park, not enough parking space. They just throw the bicycle and all that kind of thing. So end up we are not successful in this endeavor. So maybe you can have to address this.
Okay, I think first I must tell you that I'm no longer in the government. So just to set the context, and I cannot answer on behalf of the government. From what I understand from the issue is EV doesn't solve all your problems because it's still a car, right? Actually, the ideal situation is not to have cars at all. Then you don't have this problem. So you want to move into a car-light environment. That's why the walkability, cycling, and other types of modes of transport using MRT are the preferred modes of transport. But the reality is the car is not going to go away overnight, right? So if you have to compare between a car using petrol, fossil fuel, and diesel, and versus an electric vehicle is probably more efficient. Yes, it does generate electricity, and you still have to generate the electricity for the electric vehicle. So, in fact, these conversations, if I recall, when I was involved, were taking place because even I said that you still need electricity for the vehicle. But I think it is more efficient than if you were using your current cars with petrol, all right? So, of course, the ideal situation is not to have cars at all, right? And so I believe LTA and MOT and together with the agencies have said that in the end, they are trying to produce many charging points that will be available everywhere. Actually, it's a very complicated issue because the charging points, it actually is not the technical part of the charging point. And of course, charging point, you know, is the fast charge and the slower charge. All that has a cost implication, right? And it's actually finding the right business model to provide the charging point. Who should be providing the charging point? Can you make a business out of it, right? Should it be government providing? Actually, why should government provide? You don't buy petrol from the government. You go to the Shell or Esso and all that, you know. Why is it you're expecting government to provide the charging point? So I'm just saying that those are types of conversations that have been ongoing. Although now I think HDB in some places, they will do the provision, but there is a cost, right? So who's paying for it? Because actually, if you think about it, if you provide all these charging points for all the car owners, the rest of us who are not car owners are actually subsidizing the car owners. Have you thought of that? right? So actually the challenges are finding the right business model for the charging points. That's one point. But I just want to say that actually the intent is to reduce the number of cars in the first place, whether petrol, EV or whatever. The best thing is don't drive, take public transport. So I would say that is the main thing. In fact, there's a lot of discussion, is really charging the EV car the best way? Because there are other concepts like you just drive into a station, you just change the battery. You just put on a new battery. But then we know that causes another problem because then you have these millions and millions of batteries, which creates waste. So I'm just trying to say that these types of conversations are ongoing with regards to EV. Okay?
Thank you, Koon. Well, you all agree that the panel of experts, they are really experts in sustainability. But I believe we are coming to an end of session. How much time we have? Because I want to make sure, almost ending, because there are a few questions. Can I take them? Okay. Please, lady at the center, please.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much, panelists. I've really enjoyed your talks. Thank you. So I have two questions. One is first to Dr. McBain. You talked about green finance and how taxonomies are so important to basically help direct financial flows to the right place for green projects. And we've seen the debate in the EU at the moment on the green taxonomy, whether it includes infrastructure like nuclear and natural gas. So how do you see the ASEAN taxonomy evolving here in this part of the world? And do you see it including things like nuclear and natural gas? And what's the impact? The second question is to Mr. Kwa. So you talked about helping customers become more sustainable and bringing them along in the journey. So this experience of educating and sharing best practice. Can you share your thoughts on how you do that at ST Engineering? So it's quite challenging in this part of the world, I think, in some instances where the sustainability agenda is still emerging, maybe less advanced, particularly in the environmental and climate space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Taxonomies are important, particularly as we're starting out on the financing journey, so that investors and funders can understand where they should put their money. If they have to do a full assessment based on the data, which we've just discussed is imperfect every time, it's actually very time consuming. A taxonomy is setting out the framework to say, this industry, this sector could be green, this one perhaps less green. But ultimately what you're looking at is the carbon intensity of the activity. And so I think we will see the evolution of transition pathways for whole sectors. So whether it's the aviation sector or the maritime sector, this is the pathway that we're going towards a net zero. And then you can fund investment into the different organizations along that pathway and have a clearer idea. I don't think we'll be with taxonomies forever, and the current ones are based on best practice now. But I would also go back to another point that we don't even know which technologies are going to take us to net zero. And so they're clearly not included in the taxonomy. So when we're looking at nuclear or looking at gas, they're still important now for the utility of how do people in society live a decent quality of life. I don't think any of those are going to be switched off overnight. What we need to look at is how do we have this orderly and just transition. We know the end point that we want to get to, which is the low carbon economy. How do we get from where we are now to that future? And that's why I'd still say we all need to be optimists at heart to think we're going to get there. We need the innovation and we need the structure to get to that point. But no one taxonomy, I think, has all of the answers. They all bring together parts of the solutions.
Thank you. Any more questions on this side? Wow,
I think I need to address the second part of the question. Yeah. So thanks for the excellent question. All companies have two sets of customers. One set of customers that is already aware and trying to do the right thing and want to shrink their footprint, for example. The second set is not sure or needs some time to do that. I think as an action-oriented company, when we focus our customers, we focus on the first group, right? Of course, we're happy to help the second group and we are in conversations, but many of our customers are in the first group. They already want to do it. For example, 2 groups of customers for us, airlines, including air freight companies, and cities, city governments, for example. And it's pretty challenging for both sides. They all have targets they want to reach, but how do they do that? So for airlines, every aeroplane that we maintain, repair, and overhaul saves fuel. An example is our eco-wash services. We wash almost 10,000 aircraft engines per year. The fuel savings, of course, are terrific. They save money. But more than that, they save the equivalent of a carbon footprint several times that of SD Engineering's. So we're doing an outsized effort in terms of our own footprint, but we are focused on helping the customer with their footprint. So their footprint goes down as a result. For cities, I think digital infrastructure is very important, as Professor Cheong and some of us have talked about. One of the things that is challenging for cities is the use of energy, and in particular, for example, congestion. We talked about cars and all that. So if you have a lot more traffic jams or you don't manage the way you use electricity well, you're going to generate a lot more carbon than you really need to. So our digital solutions, simulations and such, help them to do that. And the question then is who's paying for it, right? So I think for cities, this can be challenging because sometimes these benefits are longer term, whereas for some of the city governments, you have a fixed budget and you're trying to deal with the pandemic and other things as well. So we try to work with them and with many partners in cities, as Professor Cheong has mentioned, it's all about partnerships. And so we work together with the customer and partners to see how we can help them, get them the data they need to make the decisions and manage energy use, manage congestion, manage transportation, for example, a lot more efficient. So hope that helps.
Thank you, Jonathan and Darian. We have 2 questions this side. Could I request both of you to ask the questions, then we'll have the panel members address your question. Please go ahead.
Now, the question is really regarding development itself. We find that development today is largely driven by commercial interests. And this has become the mantra for growth. Companies, and tied to that is also injection of lots of money. The trillions of dollars are now floating. So as a result, there's even greater imperative for development and growth and so on. But why do we want to always focus on development? Leave some development for the future, for your future generation. Why do you want to develop every piece of land that's available there? Secondly, clearly, the development projects today are not as environment friendly as the future development projects will be, because there's a lot of research going on. So in future, less material would be used, development would be more environment friendly. So postpone some of these development projects for the future. Don't just carry on developing entirely for the sake of commercial interests. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before I request the panel to respond? Okay, then in that case, we'll go ahead. Susanna, are you there? Because I was told you're online. Would you be able to?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
Can you
please
hear
go
me
ahead,
all right?
please.
Okay, so my response to that is the following. We actually follow what Professor teaches us, which is use science and use data. Let me share with you one global trend that's actually happened that I've been keeping track of. And I want to quote one of my clients, which is Microsoft CEO Satya, in his latest earnings call. The fact of the matter is, if we follow the data and the science, we have seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in just 2 months. And during the pandemic, the past 4 months of digital commerce transacted totally matched the same business volume for the past 10 years of the brick and mortar. I call that process quickening. That is the reason why we are focusing on development. Development itself is not evil. What we're all talking about is basically doing development in a sustainable way. Specifically in a data center, when we are actually doing building of new structure, one of our design is actually designed for disassembly. So we are actually focusing on when we actually build, how we actually going to disassemble it, decommission it, so we can actually reuse and practice the circular economy principles that Professor so esteemedly taught at National University of Singapore that I have attended as a guest lecturer. So delaying and shifting the time may be part of the solution. It could be a scenario for some of the development. But indeed, what is actually happening currently now is the quickening process. So we must address that because we all want to watch the Olympics on our multiple devices. And hence the infrastructure is there to provide an unprecedented level of user experience. And we're addressing the need of what we are doing today in terms of we run the society, how we educate each other, and also how we play and entertain. And work actually is not the highest priority in terms of driving a lot of this development. The way how we do the development is basically through sustainability, and we need to shift out from the linear thinking into a circular economy. Because what happened in the past brought us here today in the industrial evolution is essential. It was good, but it was not good enough, and this is insufficient to be able to support us going forward into the next decade.
Thank you, Susanna. Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think there's probably some development initiatives, being part of the government before that. You have to think about whether it's necessary or not. But I think the mindset we need to have is sustainability and not sustainability or. There are some sustainability or situations, as some of the panelists have said. But in general, if you look at many of the opportunities today, if you focus on sustainability and development, sustainability and security, you can get both done in a proper way. So sustainable development is not just a word. It happens, and I can give you plenty of examples of it from what our company does and what other companies do. I think the issue is you want to focus on the sustainability or and the difficult sensational stuff, or you want to be real engineers and say, look, there's a real world problem out there. I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to fix it in a sustainable way. So whether it's cities or it's in aerospace and airlines or it's in ships and maritime, there are solutions out there that are sustainably and. So I would really suggest and encourage the audience today to think about that line in the business you're in and say, how can I make this sustainability end? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any other panel members like to respond? If not, I'd like to go to the final round. So far, panel members share their experiences and insights. It's time for us to have a foresight question. So I phrase it so that they can respond in their own way. If you go back in time, 1972, exactly 50 years ago, diverse stakeholders of the world economy, of the society, met in Rome. It was organized by Club of Rome. It led to a book as well as a very insightful document titled Limits to the Growth. After that, United Nations, several committees finally had recent 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this is 2022. 50 years before, they were wondering, current economic models has clear limits to the growth because our only planet Earth has a limited resources, as well as the nature or the ecosystem has a limits, how much it can support. So the last 50 years, several discussions finally resulted in setting clear targets for emission reductions. And going forward in a year or two, I'm sure there would be much more attention on setting targets for material production, what they call chemical production. This is what I'm gathering from the UN discussions. It's also reported in the local media. So now the question is, 50 years from now, I hope all of us will exist, but That's not the main point. Main point is, what would be the conversation with respect to sustainability, circular economy, 50 years later? I ask this question because many of the young audience, they are on the internet, they are beginning their life, beginning their career. I'm sure they might like to hear from your wisdom and experience and your prediction about the future. So I like to ask, 50 years from now, what would be the conversation or how the world will be? Up to you. It's a futuristic question. You could decide to be fiction, or you could based on certain facts. Up to you. So anybody can go. Okay, Darian, finance
take one
person.
aspect. I think I'll go back to the point about circularity. I mean, at the moment, if we look at the economic incentive for using virgin material versus recycled material, reused material, the economic incentive just isn't there. 50 years from now, I hope we have this design for the future mentality, that it's actually designed into systems that you will reuse and have circularity, that the idea that you use something once and threw it away, or perhaps the idea that you manufactured something in one country from components from the other, sent it to another country to be used, and then dispose of it in another country, I think that would be a foreign concept. So in the future, circularity of both goods, but also of the economy is just how we're operating. And then I go back to the optimism that I raised in my presentation, that we are all here able to influence that future, and we need to design for the future that we want to live in. And so if we want the optimistic future, now is the time to be developing in such a way that we can design and try to future-proof, or at least engage in a future that we want to live in.
Thank you, Darian.
Okay, well, I'm an architect planner, and I always try to paint a future that is very nice for everybody. Of course, what we want is a future where we can live in an environment that is a high quality environment, highly livable, for all the things that we want to do, whether it's for family or for your jobs, and realizing your potential. But in a world that is clean and green and healthy, in between trying to get there is exactly what we're all here to try and do, to find those solutions, to indeed be sustainable, how to try and achieve circularity. So we're all here trying to build that very, very optimistic world. And that's a scenario I would like to see. But it will take a lot of willpower by everybody to try and achieve it. So
Thank you. Jonathan, Sheila, or Susanna, anyone?
Sure, I'm going with optimism too. I think if you don't have a view of the future of being optimistic, it's really hard to get started. And so I do believe that we have solved immense problems. Over the last 100 years, we were talking with our small team yesterday, discussing Sir David Attenborough and something that he said, which is, we've spent the last 100 years trying to make humanity better working apart from one another. So individual silos trying to achieve their company goals, individual country goals. Our opportunity is really to figure out what we can do working together. So if we could do what we've achieved over the last 120 years through the Industrial Revolution, and we have such an amazing different life, imagine what we can do if we can do this together. And so I'm voting with optimism that we can actually do that.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Having been an engineer but from an economic development background, one of the things that is important to go across all the themes of circularity or digital and sustainability is that it needs to be inclusive. So I hope that in 50 years you have all that digital, circular economy, sustainable growth and all that, but across all countries, across different ethnic groups, across different strata of society. I think that's very, very important for us, and I think we'll all benefit from it. I think some of the questions we raised today are somewhat first world problems. Sometimes I think we need to keep a bigger perspective and think about the whole world as one instead of where we are at. And that's not easy. I must admit, it's a challenge for me as well. But I hope that in 50 years, it will become normal to think of inclusive growth and an inclusive society in whatever we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Susanna, I'm not sure you're still online. We know
Yes,
that
I
you
am.
are battling your past midnight. Please go ahead.
Well, 50 years from now, I would like to think that we will not need to have a conference relating sustainability. Similar to the fact that we don't need to get together to talk about classified ad or telephone booth, because it's something in the past. We already and inherently have exemplified the UN SDG goal. And definitely for my sector, hopefully we have all exemplified and demonstrated in our practice on carbon neutrality sustainability concept on every kilowatt of hour that we use and every of the consumption we do to support the digital transformation. And then 50 years from now, I would like to say that, hey, it was kind of interesting that what these guys talked about back in 2022 when they were struggling actually with the pandemic. And because 20 years ago, which will bring us to 2030, that majority of all the pledges that was made in the Paris Agreement and was reiterated at the COP26 Glasgow event has met. Even though currently now, when it all tally up, it will not be hold to the 1.5 degrees Celsius that we all need to tackle climate crisis. So I'm very optimistic that even though we don't know how to get there in the future, but as long as we all aim in the same direction, we're all heading in the same direction. I'm an optimist from Silicon Valley. We fundamentally believe in innovation and entrepreneurship, and we all collaborate as an ecosystem, all work towards the goal. We will get there way before 2050, Professor.
Thank you, Susanna. Well, I'm mindful of the time constraints for the audience as well as the panel members because you have other engagements in the day. I like to bring this interesting, wide-ranging panel discussion to an end by a short summary. You all agree that this panel is well represented by diverse sectors of economy and society, ranging from engineering, aviation, infrastructure, digital technologies, finance, and governance. Of course, I should not exclude myself, and I'm an academic, so obviously the universities are also represented here. It's very clear from the experience shared by the panel members that industry, economies are moving in the direction of sustainability and circular economy. There are good progress is being made in terms of innovating, implementing some of the technologies, energy efficiency, renewables, as well as circular management and design, fintech, digital technologies, and so on. All the panel members are very optimistic. I join them that world today, as well as the unfolding world from now, would be much better with the designing circularity, circular economy in mind, and planning for the future, and do every bit that we can do to make this world a better world. With that, I like to thank all the panel members for their time, preparation, joining this meeting on behalf of Institution of Engineers Singapore, audience, and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Please thank our panel moderator, Professor Siram, as well. Thank you to all our panelists. Please remain on stage for a little while longer. We have a special token of appreciation to present to you. Oh, but before I forget, everybody please thank Susanna as well. Susanna, we have not forgotten you. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite our IES President, Dr. Richard Kwok, to be accompanied by Organising Chairman Dr. Bo on stage to present the tokens of appreciation to each of our panelists. But I would like to remind our panelists to please put back your mask on. Thank you. Susanna, you may like to know that we will be flying your token of appreciation to you over to the US of A. Thank you. All right, a big thank you to Ms. Sheila Remes. Thank you, Sheila. Dr. Darian, you're next. Thank you, Dr. Darian. Next, Professor Cheong. Thank you, Prof. Cheong. Next, Mr. Jonathan Kwa. Thank you, Mr. Kwa. And last but certainly not the least, our panel moderator, Professor Siran Ramakrishna.